Alright, we're gonna start it up. It's time to start her up. Dish. And of course that video I premiered yesterday from High Impact Flicks, I reposted it on my channel today. Because I said to myself, why not? If not now, when? And so I reposted it. But anyways, we're going to watch different interviews from, this time, Day 9. Day 9 interviews, we start off with Stephanie Mo Davis. Then we watch Ken Bartle, and then I might be skipping Mark, only because it's not necessarily on topic, and it's separate, and has less to do with end of slavery, more to do with other contexts related. So that's going to be more of the side thing, because we always go about 3 or 4 hours anyways, even without an extra interview, because there's extra videos I can play at the end, of course, as usual. And of course, anything else, I never know what else I'm going to do on stream. I could do something else, gaming or who knows what, but recording wise. So Stephanie Mo Davis, she has a lot of expertise within the medicine field. You know, she's somebody who, she's talked to many doctors. She knows a lot about how to coach people, essentially, and the art of coaching as opposed to doctors. And that's why she succeeds and they don't, and why the doctors end up needing her. So it's going to be a really powerful conversation for anyone who's into health, or in general, the principle of care, right brain, femininity, and understanding that feminine world versus the masculine world. And then we have Ken Bartle, who's going to go over consciousness and everything about consciousness, how it operates, how we can take control of the consciousness, and what solutions and practices we can use for our consciousness to attain anything we want, basically. You know, it's basically like a superpower. And he expresses that basically in an interview. He's like, this is amazing once you understand it, and his books are heavily detailed, so he's definitely another great interview to watch. Full of wisdom, the guy. And of course, there's tons of other resources on day 9. For instance, the problem with the use of the term government. I created that small little document. There's the Justinian Deception document, which goes over how words have been changed over time. There is a bunch of quotes and a bunch of information about the economics and a compilation of articles concerning the metaphysics of money and natural law, and some of old philosophy and how it relates to understanding the nature of money in relation to intelligence and in relation to freedom, all of that. You would have to argue it's like economics, health, all that is equally important. Hey Nicholas, welcome to the stream. Glad to see you, and thank you, DK. Yeah, but some people, will say economics is most important, and then another person will say, no, health is most important. Obviously, it's all very, very important. So that document goes into all that. And then there's another document that says How to End Cruelty to Animals, People, and Nature by Mike Adams. It's another document that you'll get with day 9 in the summit if you signed up. Keep in mind, day 9 will be extended into tomorrow, so you have time to get it. And of course, on the final days of the summit, there'll be replays of every day in case you missed anything, and you can always go back and download any of the free gifts. But there's also going to be extra videos we're going to go over today, including what about paperwork for freedom. There's a lot of people who believe they can just file paperwork to attain their freedom. How about voting? There's a lot of people who still think voting is the best they can do. A lot of people may be afraid of the word anarchist, not understanding what it really means. What does it really mean if we break it down? Are more people anarchists and they don't even realize it simply by their own philosophy? And as well as a scientific experiment we're going to show today called the Milgram experiment. You may have not heard of that, but it proves that humans have this tendency to be blindly obedient. But although we can say it's a tendency, and although psychological experiments can prove that people will obey authority under any circumstance, that doesn't mean that we can't break out of those chains, because often we are indoctrinated into those chains from the very beginning of our lives. Our undying authority complex, that we need an authority always in control of our lives and must do whatever they say, regardless if it's actually right and wrong. If we instead started with that premises of let's understand right and wrong rather than follow authority, then the world would look drastically different. But we put one above the other. And so you can just ask yourself that simple question is, if a law is tyrannical, if a law is worth disobeying, are you going to put the law above your own conscience? Are you ever going to put the law above your own conscience? What you know is right versus wrong. And, the point is most people want the law generally to reflect their conscience. But if you think something is right and another person thinks it's wrong, should that still be imposed upon someone? It's like, this is the whole dynamic we're talking about, is understanding consent, understanding ownership, understanding who's claiming to rule over another person's life. So let's get started. The first interview is going to be Stephanie Mo Davis. Again, she comes from a medical background, talks to many doctors, talks to many people, and finds out this system is bad and they need help, not just their patients. Let's begin.
Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelot here with Aaron Butler, my co-host, and here with a very special guest, Stephanie Mo Davis. She considers herself a metaphysician, guide, and a true friend. She mentors private clients and is affiliated with several organizations, assisting in spiritual awakening, personal, relational, and systemic transformation and integration implementation practices. Stephanie's own journey of healing began over 20 years ago, probably more than that by now. She is operating 3 wellness studios, apparently, that are all focused on how understanding and embracing our direct experiences can completely shift our life. She's a co-author also of several books. Her website is StephanieMoDavis.com. That's StephanieMoDavis.com. And she's a co-founder and executive producer at AwakeningHealthcare.com, a co-founder at IntegrationMentors.com, co-founder and director at regeneratinghealthcare.org. And we're going to be talking a lot about sort of the medical industry, her experiences, and the powerful realizations that she came up to really understand over her many years. And of course, she'll go into this a lot more herself. But just talking with you, Stephanie, we talked before doing this, and it's just powerful. Your stories, your personal stories, and the things that you've noticed within the medical field, the mentalities of the doctors, of the people within the profession, and sort of what you see is not always being fulfilled. Maybe healing that needs to be done on their part, not just the healing that they bring to their clients or to their patients, but also toward themselves. So how do we introduce this idea? And we're going to be talking about sort of ending that inner slavery, divine inner sacred union. How do we introduce this idea? If you want to introduce a bit more about yourself as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Corey and Aaron, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel really honored. I love your community and what everyone's trying to do. And it's not always easy. It's been quite a journey to get where I am. And I know it's been quite a journey for most people that are interested in this sort of natural law, ending slavery work. It's required a lot of direct experience, and it takes a lot to recapitulate and get up sometimes to take action to kind of create this new paradigm that we're all seeking to see exist within the world. And healthcare certainly is not the easiest field to get involved in. In fact, I've had many people wish me good luck and kind of send me on my way because they don't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because they know that there's so many systemic issues, from financial to how our treatment protocols to pharmacology. It's just, there's so much shadow within healthcare that it's really difficult to know even where to begin. And in fact, question for so long with my colleague that I work here with in Houston, Texas, who is a physician, was, does this just have to be brought down and a new system be built? Or is there some way that we can salvage and work together with what exists and really distill out of the system what's working and try to somehow shift what's not? But the industry is deeply rooted in some of the most, I want to say, kind of pernicious systems that can get distorted, such as academia, the overly left brain, the intellectual capacity, the just how the whole system functions from soup to nuts is really devoid of the feminine principle completely. And this was the first thing that I noticed when I had my direct experience. So I'm not a healthcare professional. What I call myself is a subjective experiencer with an integrated awareness of what needs to be integrated for better patient outcomes. So what I mean by that is I got really sick when I was 19 years old. And the weird thing about my sickness, and what really catalyzed this work and me finding the meaning within my experience, came at this time in my life where I actually couldn't have been more healthy. So this is just kind of a myth that I want to kind of debunk, is that sometimes we feel as though unhealthy people get sick, which is very true. But sometimes people who are doing things perceivably really right also can have a problem arise. And that was me. I was doing all of the perceivably right things to do to be healthy. I was a yoga teacher. I was in a healthy relationship. I was vegan at the time, eating all organic, doing all of the, so to speak, healthy community ways of living. And all of a sudden, one day, I couldn't walk. And that proceeded into a lot of testing where I was misdiagnosed about 6 times. And a year went by before they could really truly figure out what was wrong with me. And by that time, I had an autoimmune disease, had already started to wreak a lot of havoc on my inner system by the time they truly figured out or labeled my disease, which was systemic lupus. And at the time, it's a little bit hard to diagnose. So this was about 20 plus years ago. So there had to be like a set of 7 out of 10 criteria all happening at the same time for them to diagnose me with this condition. So the long story short is that it was a hot mess. And that by the time they really figured it out, I was almost on death's door and I was about 21 years old. So for me, inside of my psyche, I felt really betrayed by God, so to speak, because I said, what's up? I'm doing everything right. Like, what's up? What more can I do? And actually, that began a journey of really doing my own internal shadow work, because I wasn't going to just settle with not really understanding why this happened when I was working so hard to be so healthy. So, what I realized for myself over a 10-year journey of being really critically ill, in and out of the hospital, on high doses of all sorts of drugs to keep me alive, I had so many doctors say to me, Stephanie, we don't know what else to do for you. Like, your body is not responding to anything. I had a lot of doctors who told me to forget anything else that I was doing to help myself, as far as the wellness community or the, yoga community, spiritual community. They were saying, well, that obviously doesn't work. So don't do anything there. Just stay on the meds and follow what we're doing. So it was really kind of, I don't know, I felt as though I permitted myself to let go of such a big part of myself because I felt betrayed by it. Because I was already spiritual. I was already doing all the things that I thought were the ideal way to heal. So I felt really betrayed. But I realize now that I had to completely go into the full direct experience of the Western medical model for me to sit here today. So I had to abandon myself from those practices and fully go into it as though I didn't know anything about it, for me to get the full observational view of what was really going on within the system. So I spent about 10 years really struggling to stay alive. And obviously everything that they were doing wasn't really helping me. It was barely keeping me alive and making me worse, really, quite frankly. My kidneys completely failed by the age of 25. So I found myself in a dialysis clinic at 25, being dialyzed 3 times a week, 4 hours, 5 hours a day, where the dialysis process, if you don't know about it, it's very difficult. A lot of people don't do well on it. It's very draining. They completely filter your entire system of blood through what looks like a house water filter, and they pull out all the toxins. But because the actual filtration system isn't advanced enough to know what to pull out and what not, it pulls everything out. So pretty much after each session, you just feel dead. You have to eat and sleep and recover those vitamins until you have to go back a day and a half later. So I was on dialysis for 4 years before I was eligible to receive a kidney transplant. And that whole process, guys, of being in the clinics, being shuffled through doctors, going through a transplant center, and being in it, but also having the observational view. So this I believe is my gift, is that I was able to directly go into the experience, but because I had a lot of spiritual wisdom and density built up prior to that, I was also able to observe it. So it's kind of like I was in it fully, but then at times I could really pull back and be like, what's going on here? What needs to be fixed? What's not working? So that was really my gift. And, so at 30, I received my first transplant. And I remember it seemed like the closing of a chapter where the medical field said to me, God, you've been through hell. Now you finally got your kidney. Now you recover and you can get your life back. Like, go get him now. And what happened was, after the transplant, after I recovered and I was fortunate enough to have a donor, there's a lot of misconceptions around donation, and there's a lot of shadow in the world of organ donation. But I have to say, there are legit people who do need organs. So there has to be a lot of work done in that part of the field as well. I understand that saying organ donation just triggers some people because they hear what goes on in China and some other places. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have it. So obviously I feel as though it's a positive thing that we just need to clear the shadow out if possible. But after my transplant, I sat there and I was 30. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table, and I was supposed to be very happy and elated and excited that finally this hell was over. I was going to be healthy. And I remember just putting my head in my hands and saying, what the hell just happened? Like, I just lost 10 years of my life in a system that felt like I was navigating through some sort of hell environment, and I've lost everything. I didn't have my college degree. I wasn't married. I didn't have any children. I didn't have a job. I was very low income at that time from all the bills I had accrued over the last 10 years. And I was like, yeah, that go get 'em kid like mentality is definitely not how I feel. And then I started to feel like, all right, if I'm going to survive this experience, I have to completely transform what happened to me. Because if I don't, I'm going to lead the rest of my life with these inner, like, CPTSD trauma responses and fears from this 10 years that I just experienced. I don't want to compare myself to a veteran, but I'm saying if you're in a really unhealthy, toxic environment and you're feeling like everything is so discombobulated and crazy, you're traumatized. And then when you get out of it, it's like, yeah, I don't have like anything, and I got to start completely over from nothing. And this isn't the reality that I really I had fought for my life for 10 years. So that's when I started realizing that I'm either going to go into a depression, or I need to put my big girl pants on and I need to figure out how to overcome my inner trauma from this experience. So that's when I realized that I had already lost trust in a lot of the aspects of the medical system. I had already had so many interactions with really prestigious medical professionals from big institutions like Hopkins and other really big institutions, where every time they would come to see me, they'd be like asking me questions. How are you doing so well? You're like, none of my patients look like this. Like, can you help me? I'm stressed out. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm dying, and I still seem to have the most amount of spirit and energy of anybody in this system. Something is really, really wrong here. And I started to realize and talk to a lot more patients and see how much they struggled with integrating, and their quality of life was just, I knew that there was so much more potential. So I dedicated the next 10 years of my life operating yoga centers and wellness centers. And the aggregate of my client would always come in and say the same thing, which I understood. They would say, hey, I'm here because I'm recovering from cancer, or I'm getting a divorce, or my son just passed away. I see a therapist, I eat well, I try to exercise, I pray. It's not working. I still need something else. Can you help me? And that's when I really realized, I was like, yeah, I know what you're missing, because it was what I experienced was missing from the system the whole time. And it's what people don't know how to do in terms of recovering from trauma, reconciling these circumstances that we go through. And about the same time, I had a really amazing catalytic interaction with a friend of mine who turned out to really be like a mirror of my shadow, right? So sometimes people label this, like in the new age community, they'll call it like a twin flame, or like somebody who's comes into your life, knocks your socks off, but they like embody your polarity. And it's super triggering. It's just real confusing. It appears to be toxic unless you start to conceptually understand the potential within what appears to be toxic. So because I had such a passion for figuring things out and pattern recognition, I was like, something's happening here that actually it's a potential for me to integrate myself through the things that are triggering me about this person. And as I started to do that shadow work, that mirror work, he was in healthcare. So simultaneously, I was like, oh, this is so interesting, because now I see that the system cannot be any better, because their focus is completely on the left brain externalization of helping a human being, even biologically, as far as like technology and AI and advancements and equipment and things like that. But there's absolutely the further we go out in our innovative process for healthcare, the further we get away from that inner tech, that inner consciousness, that transformation that has to be done within. So I realized very quickly, if I'm going to help myself recover from this, if I'm going to try to help other people, I actually first need to work with the professionals, because they are so devoid of the spiritual nature within themselves. And their ability to be really fully self-aware is just completely devoid. This starts in medical school. They're completely trained out of their feminine side. And they have knowledge, and a lot of them do have heart. So this is the thing. I've met a lot of practitioners now in the work that I'm doing. And at first, it was a little overwhelming to see. I felt like I was an embodiment of the feminine around all of these men and women who were fully left brain, and it felt like we couldn't even see each other, yet alone communicate. But I was really adamant to stay in my feminine principle and get them to listen to me. I didn't want to change. I was really going to be that experiencer and that feminine principle of what I was seeing, even though they were having a really hard time listening to me because I didn't have the credentials behind my name. But I was just really adamant. And what happened was I started to gain attention from certain providers, basically because they reached out to me to help a particular patient. But then what would always happen was they would be the one who needed the help. So I started to realize, oh, okay, I'm literally like mentoring healthcare providers. And they're claiming that it's for their patient because they might not want to admit that they need this work, especially from someone that they can't even describe what she does. But that's what was happening. So then I had about 2 to 3 prestigious providers that, like, behind the scenes, I started working with them with the inner work, the mirror work, the shadow work, the bias. And lo and behold, we all recognize, like, holy shit, excuse my French, this is really powerful. But it's very taboo. It's very taboo because we don't understand it. We don't talk about it. It's not taught. It's, they like to portray themselves as being the ultimate hierarchical knowledge of healthcare. They're the experts. They have the expertise. So it had taken the right medical individuals to either be in so much pain to be able to be open to this, or quite honestly, in both situations that I'm referring to in my mind, that's what it was, is that there was such of an internal impasse and dissonance within themselves that the meeting was very serendipitous, because I realized, I see why we're together, because you're actually ready and you can hear me. Whereas the aggregate of the provider, they might feel burnout, but they have no clue as to the ways in which they're contributing to their own burnout through trauma, emotional expenditure in false ways. I mean, a lot of the hospital system, if you work in it, really operates like a system that looks like it has it together, but behind the scenes, it operates like a high school environment. The group dynamics are very infantile. Most of them can't even stand each other. They talk about each other. So talking about trust within the system, they don't even trust each other within the system. Most colleagues don't even trust other colleagues within the system. So I was starting to put all this together, and all of my experience and all of these interactions I was having and realizing, I know what we really need in the healthcare system to make things begin to be better, which is a new set of first principles where we personally do the self-awareness and mirror work and shadow work on ourselves to be in that system. So we have the foundational principle of self-love. So then when we go out into the world, our missions are aligned and we have better, healthier group dynamics. And then you start to cultivate a system that's starting healthy. You're not taking something that's toxic and trying to continue to troubleshoot it at the end, when meanwhile you haven't even done the real work. And that's what happens, is that because there's a lot of intellects in the system, they hear the ideas, they hear the concepts, they get the ideology, and then they usurp it before they embody it. Oh, let me get research to talk about how we can integrate empathy into the system. Meanwhile, they have no clue how to be empathetic themselves. So it's this weird circumstance where, as we all know, the healthcare field is the primary recipient of grants, of resources, of funding, of support. So these other people, such as myself or other people outside of the system who have really cool things to implement, it's really difficult to do because they're not in the know with the culture. right? So it's been really hard to kind of break through that. But long story short, I've gotten some attention of some practitioners, and really what I do now through my personal experience is to cultivate a self-aware system by doing the self-work through each and every individual provider, and implementing programs for patients if they're dealing with an illness or a chronic disease, to say, hey, we have this other system if you want to further your potential for healing that has to do with a lot of inner work. So it's one of those things where the system had to, and people within the system, they always would just want to help their patient better, because they look better if they can help their patient better. But meanwhile, this really shifts the narrative, because you can't be a part of this system that I have unless you do the work as well. It doesn't matter how many PhDs you have. So it's really like you have to be a part of this system to do your own work, to be able to implement it with your patients. So that's a little bit about my story and what I do. So
Wow. There's a lot. I mean, you covered so much stuff. Do you see a lot of the medical field? How do you see them as being willing to look at themselves or do that mirror work? Because I see it as, it's a shame, because there's so much experience, and there's so much that people are experiencing. There's the saying, everything you need to know is within you. And I see there's a lifetime of experience in any one person. Do you see them as like how often do you see people as willing to do this shadow work, or be willing to look at the holistic side of things?
So from where I sit right now, because things are rapidly changing actually right now. So what I see is there's already a subsect that has been burnt out and disenfranchised by the system, and they've already left. So when I say the system, I mean the traditional Western model of healthcare or hospital environments, the big guys. So there have been a lot of people that have already completely exited, which I would say are the holistic practitioners, the functional medicine docs, the people who have said, like, this system is jacked, I gotta get out, and they do their own thing on the side. One of my desires was I realized that's what we have to do to survive. In some circumstances, we have to just exit stage left to get out of an unhealthy situation. But I felt for and had compassion for the people that were in my situation, the people who have a lot of trauma from their past, or they get thrown into this chronic illness situation. And I felt as though they deserved a better opportunity as well. So even though it's the most shadowy place to be, the hospital, I felt it was the one that needed the most work, and the system that was going to provide me the most challenge to try to do something within. So there's a certain subsect have already left the system. And then the people within the system, what you find right now is that COVID really amplified the pre-existing condition of the system being broken. Some doctors have been very open in saying that, oh, actually, I think it just ripped the Band-Aid off of what was going on underneath our noses this whole time. We see it more clearly. For instance, such as, we used to glorify hustle culture, and I'm working 80 hours a week, and I live at the hospital. And there used to be a glorification of the unhealthy behavior, because that's the ego, right? And now they're kind of saying, and realizing, actually, my family's been destroyed by this. My personal life isn't that well. Like, actually, this might not have been healthy all along. We may have been looking at it wrong. And then it's funny because Corey and I have a mutual friend we were talking about earlier who, and again, this is not for everybody's ears, but I will say it, we call it the temple of COVID. So it's kind of like COVID has done something really bad, but then there's also been something really sacred that has been exposed through this COVID pandemic. And for the healthcare industry, it's been just that. It's been like, we're going to show you right up in your face the ways in which this system is broken and needs to change. So now there's just a huge population of healthcare professionals just leaving, or they're really unhappy. They're really depressed. They're self-medicating. They're literally going down a road as a healthcare expert where they're going to become the patient if they don't find a way to mitigate this, ameliorate this stress. And then there's other people who still are a little bit naive. Maybe they're newer, or they're really glorified in their position. They're kind of more of the narcissist within the system, where maybe they're older, like a surgeon, super ego, gets everything his way. He might not really have to look at himself as much as the normal practitioner or provider might. So there's this dynamic within healthcare that plays out just like in humanity right now, which is like, where are the psychopaths and narcissists as opposed to the empaths and heart-based people? That same dynamic lives within healthcare. So there's heart-based people who are like, this is really wrong. This is not healthy. We got to do more for our patients. I need a healthier schedule. I'm losing the ability to connect with my patients because I'm so stressed out. And then there's the psychopaths and the narcissists of the system who are like, I don't know what's wrong with you. You're weak. This is war. You signed up for this. You have to. So that is playing out within all of our systems as well, from the inside out. So to answer your question, the people within the system who are still within the system and haven't completely left, those people don't really want to talk about fixing the system. They've already been broken by it. And they're like, I got a clinic over here and I don't want to talk about the system. But the people that within the system that are willing to listen right now are the people who are really being broken down. It's the people who, they were born to be a doctor, they believe. They put their whole heart and soul in this, and now they're dying. They're literally trying to keep their head above water. And they're saying, like, if I don't find something to help me, because what I'm self-medicating isn't working, being an alcoholic isn't working, escaping to my ranch on the weekend is no longer helping me. All of the ways they use to mitigate their stress, it's not working. So the people who are seeking the openness to do this work are the people who are really suffering, just like me, when nothing that the system has to offer is actually helping. And they're afraid, I'm either going to quit my job, which I don't want to do, or I'm going to have to find something to help me. So that's where I kind of come in with the work that I'm doing and say, hey, there's this thing, there's this system that I utilized for myself that really helped me when I was fighting for my own survival. And do you want to hear about it? It's really a process towards self-realization and self-awareness, and finally taking the mirror and putting it back on them fixing themselves, instead of thinking that they're the experts in fixing others and they've never even done any work to understand how this process works within themselves.
Wow. I have one more question. I really like to ask this one. And I have experience with my health and, being disenfranchised, and it took me a long time to be able to reflect. And, after I went through my whole experience, what it took me to start meditating and, experiencing plant medicine and things like that, to where all of my experiences, it's kind of like I was able to take a break and actually reflect, and it gave me some distance. And it was like all of my experiences before this were just like kind of seen before me. What kind of practices do you recommend or that helped you? Like specifically, like you mentioned yoga. I'm not sure if you mentioned meditation, but is there anything that you recommend for someone that is disenfranchised or is in the system and they're really, having a hard time?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to think how I want to say this. There are external practices that people can do that very much are helpful to begin to connect as a gateway to a deeper understanding of the real work that really needs to be done. So as I said, when I got sick, I was already meditating. I was already doing yoga, right? Now, if you haven't been introduced to those fields of study, that may be exactly what your elixir or medicine is in the moment from where you sit. The biggest part of the work that I do is really, truly permitting a better assessment plan for a patient to discover what they've already done and where they are. So really having a personalized program that they learn to create for themselves. So instead of a healthcare system saying, this is how healthcare works, what I do is I come in with their direct experience. We get an assessment of what has your life been like? Are you more introverted or extroverted? Do you do things, or are you more? Figure out who that person is, and then help them to cultivate their own system of what they need to continue to develop on their healing path. I know that Corey and I had often talked about everybody needs something slightly different depending on where they're at, even with things like diet. So putting a one size fits all dimension on anybody on any level of their healing process does not work. Right. So some people were a vegetarian for a very long time. I was a vegetarian for 20 years. That was actually a huge contributing factor to some of my inflammation within my body with my autoimmune disease. And again, this does not sit well for everybody, but we have to mature in our understanding to see that everybody at every different level of awakening requires something different, and it may change. And you have to be open to that shift and change, because your belief system might be coming more so from what you desire your reality to look like, rather than what your body's really intuitively trying to tell you at each and every moment. So some strong belief systems that we have, again, you have to use discernment and look at your own personal story. And you have to say, well, I've tried this. It didn't really work for me again. Do I want to try again? Or do I want to try Qigong instead of yoga? Or do I want to try a different diet and really see very consciously if that works for me? Or do I need to not do anything else external in my reality and completely start to get rid of everything from within me and just sit here with nothing and think about the ways I need to let people go in my life or create better boundaries? So it's really about finding the person where they're at and then letting them prioritize through just conscious conversation. What is the thing that's really bothering you or hindering right now? And let's think about different approaches for you to try to see if that might be, help you with creating your own system of healing.
It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really like everything that you have been talking about. And I think it could resonate with a lot of people simply with their frustration or the confusion with what's going on. And, regardless of what people think, like you said about COVID, regardless of people's opinions about, oh, was this plan or whatever, you can look at the mentalities of the people. You can look at where's the empathy, where's the use of machinery, the want for one size fits all. Oh, take this cure, it will solve everything. Oh, let's pass this law, it will solve everything. And I see that connection a lot. I kind of want to bring this into another question, if you don't mind. Within the medical field, and of course, I'm a health coach, and I noticed it, especially within my practice. I would talk to doctors and they would be like, man, I'm restricted. I can't use this medicine because of the FDA or because of this agency, this government agency. And of course, a lot of people may understand, like, yeah, the government is involved with a lot of things, but it seems like it has a big toll on our health as well. And a lot of practitioners don't always acknowledge that, in my view. And I don't know if you agree with that, but if you look at like what you're saying, there's a system that we need to look at, an alternative system to healthcare. Maybe there's an alternative system to politics. And maybe all along, we're just trying to get rid of the systems that don't belong and bring in the systems that naturally are to belong. What would you have to say about that?
Well, I like what you said. To start off with your statement about, sometimes doctors can't prescribe things, they can't do what they actually want to do because of the system that they lie within. I mean, that's happened to me, where I needed certain things to stay alive that I couldn't get what I needed. And then I had, again, it depends, very individualistic on the provider or patient, because then maybe another doctor would say, well, I'm going to try to fight for you, and I'm going to call this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And there was some sort of like nobility, like appreciation that they were fighting for me. But then I could tell that somehow they felt noble in trying to fight this system and do this. Whereas if you just do this inner work, you don't comply with a system that does things in a backwards kind of manner. So a big proponent of doing this inner work is it cultivates a different breed of human being. And then all of a sudden, you don't have to fragment yourself and do things that are harmful to others. I mean, the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. But meanwhile, within the system and other systems that we have, we're doing a ton of harm because we're complying with things that somehow feel either we want to ignore, or they're over our head, or somehow we have a particular agenda within lying and not being honest to ourselves. So that's why I'm such a proponent of getting people on board to do the inner work, because it starts to literally transform the being that you are. And you don't comply, you don't do things that are against your soul, you don't insult your own soul. And this is where I believe we can start to cultivate a better system, a new system. I don't know exactly how that looks from inside out or outside in, but I do believe that we can only really have a good foundation when we're willing to do the things that we're afraid to do. And this, you only get to this level of courage and grace and action if you really continue to clean yourself out. For me, it's a daily commitment. I'm on board. I'm already in. So I don't check out or do things to find my alignment. I've done the work to the degree where every day now I'm just like, what needs to go? What thought pattern needs to go? What do I have to address within myself to stay on my mission, to take action within the world? I think that there's a lot of people that have good concepts for recreating our systems and our world. And we have these ideas of how we want to talk about ending slavery and getting things out. But if you're talking about ending slavery, but you're enslaved at home because you're in a codependent relationship with your wife, because you have issues with your mother, and like, you have to figure that out. You have to clean that out in order for you to really cultivate a new paradigm. This isn't just a new business. If you want to cultivate a new paradigm, you have to have many people who have this level of commitment to not comply with what's against our soul, and to not sell out, and to be willing to be uncomfortable. I can't tell you, I was homeless a couple of times along my journey. I had to do things to put myself where I didn't know what was coming next. And it's a big part of the real true initiation of the process, is to do the things that you're most afraid of. And I think that, unfortunately, we just are a part of many systems, politically included, where it's too easy to comply. We have our own personal agendas, we have our own toxic behaviors, and we hang out with that kind of an environment that normalizes it. And that's where we get stuck. So people have to really be willing to say, I'm not this person anymore. I'm not going to hang out with these types of people anymore. I'm going to do the work to find the people that relate with me. And then I'm going to have to stay in that space where we're all encouraging each other to do the work and stay on board and do the hard thing, or we're never going to be able to shift this power dynamic.
Yeah, it sounds like acting on principles, having really firm ground principles, like you said, like self-care, and then bringing that into the world. And something I like to say, and we talked about before, is this idea that if you don't love yourself, well, how can you love anyone else? It's sort of the same thing you mentioned, is like,
Right.
well, you need to work out your own slavery before you can start really helping the world with its enslavement. And it's like, who's to say that you should help everybody else? You got to take a look at yourself, and that's the best thing you can do. The only thing you can do, like you said, it's individualized. Everybody knows themselves the best, and they simply need to listen or get in tune with that. So I definitely like that. The term I use is bio-individuality. At least that's what we use in integrative nutrition. And sort of
That's
what I
great.
see is like an alternative system to like man's law would be natural law, right? Which I'm sure you're aware of. And this whole idea of statism, I don't know if it will ever get recognized by the medical establishment. Some people would consider it an illness to think that, hey, some people have more rights than others, or that some people can dictate to others what they should do with their life, and should have these sort of psychopathic traits of, well, it's okay if violence is okay in this scenario, or it's okay in that scenario. It can get pretty dangerous. And a lot of healthcare practitioners, I feel like, they don't know about this. They never looked at it before. And I would like to get your perspective on that, with statism, and how you kind of woke up to that statist agenda, because you kind of you've looked into statism before. We've talked, and you know about Mark Passio and a lot of his ideas about feminine and masculine, which kind of deals with like the topics we're talking about with inner union, right? Bringing the masculine and the feminine together, finding out the best of each side, creating a balance, and understanding that maybe if we're thinking all the time and too analytical, we're too left brain, but maybe if we're too like just doing yoga all day and meditating all the time and we're too right brain. I think that's something we have to practice and understand. And you're right, we have to address ourselves. So while I'm looking at externally, I'm saying, well, look at the government, look at these people, is that really as important? But if we have a belief system of our own that is contributing to those people, then that is something I want to ask you about. How did you address statism within your life?
Well, it's a big question. What I have to say is I didn't know about a lot of this myself because it's not taught. I didn't have a family that was interested in this growing up. So it's something that you have to have a knowledge and a desire to educate yourself on. So, I mean, this would be great if this changed. I think it is changing. There are people that are working on different forms of education, even for younger children, to start to actually bring awareness to the important things that we need to be aware of within how certain areas of our government or our system actually is causing oppression and how we comply with that. So there has to be, for me, there was a desire to know, and it was a call to start to educate myself. And that's really when I think I found Mark maybe like, I don't know, I was lucky to find him maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And I remember diving into the trivium and diving into his lectures and diving into, his natural law presentations and, the fake ass Christians, which is that's what I grew up with my father. That's what created so much dissonance with me. And I wanted to get away from spirituality for a long time because that was my model. And then also seeing how I ran in the other direction to find integration for myself. And I became that new age person that was way unintegrated in that aspect. So one of the things that really helped me to have a better grasp on this, how I perceive it, is by understanding what the masculine and feminine principles are, and then really sharing with people and understanding what the wounded versions or the traumatized versions of these energies are. Because very often I find that we just don't even have a base understanding of what's really going on within the world. There's just one side or one narrative that's being displayed. So, as far as men, I mean, there's been a lot of backlash with men and a lot of females blaming everything on the misogyny of men and not taking their own self-accountability to realize, wait, you're super toxic with your feminine energy. Don't you see how you manipulate and the things that you do that contribute to this? And then the ways in which we kind of like adjudicate or adapt in toxic ways to try to mitigate that toxic behavior. So then the man becomes passive because the woman's toxic on him, he's passive. So for me, one of the biggest things that helped me to deal with this statism and discover what it really is natural law and how really can this be beneficial to a community like healthcare who's completely left-brained, completely devoid of any of this understanding around natural law for the most part. How can I create a system or something that helps them to understand in a digestible way? And I have that mentality where in this industry, I'm not going to be able to make a change if I come in guns blazing and just try to tear it down. I actually did that because I became so frustrated with the system that I started calling things out. And what I realized is, again, there's that label of like, get this girl out of here. We don't know what's going on with her. So then I sat with myself and I realized, how can I educate this in a way where people feel like they can see me and they want to learn about it? So I kind of took the anger part out, and I realized that I have to approach this with strategy and grace to get them to listen.
I think it's all amazing. I really appreciate that. It's because a lot of the times with this, I think I like to focus on the feminine aspect of things, because with the hyper masculine, the hyper intellectual system that everything's operating under. What it really requires people to do is to ignore themselves and to ignore this feminine aspect and to live in contradiction with themselves, which internal contradiction, I see as will indefinitely lead to disease. I see when someone, it causes stress, it causes schism in the mind and in the body. And, as the mind continues in a contradiction with itself, and you don't have this holistic feminine aspect, you have no ability to look at yourself or look at other people, or look at things in a big picture. You're very zoned in, you're very focused. I call the doctors philosophers, and they're they're all into the surgerism cult, and it's all surgery, or it's philosophy is what I call it. And the school system, I call it the skull system, because it's just all about this intellect. And I have a frustration with it because I went through it. I was in the medical field and I would see this, and I couldn't speak out. It was so difficult, and I started to notice just this huge contradiction within myself. And I knew that was causing stress on my life that I knew would make me sick. Especially once the COVID happened, and then I was called a conspiracy theorist for wanting to order medical supplies a month before it came. And then when it came, we were just underhanded, and I was like, it was just totally a toxic way to view things. But yeah, I just think that the holistic ability to come in tune with the feminine and do the self work is really just such an amazing way to view things, rather than trying to prescribe or say do this, do that. It's really look at your experience and find what's going to help you out, help you, and then take that to others.
Mm-hmm. It really is the feminine principle. I mean, we're going to continue to hit brick walls and steel doors, surgery doors, unless we really incorporate the feminine principle. But it's so elusive. I mean, it may show up in the medical field in a hospice situation. It may show up in particular situations for a moment, like a glimpse, like a wave or a breath, a fresh air of the feminine energy. But she needs to be there all the time. So one of my goals is to, and one of the reasons why I never went back to school to finish up, I was going to school for healthcare as well, is because I wanted to be a living embodiment of seeing the holistic perspective. And I call this, I had to be, again, very strategic about trying to get an implementation of the feminine principle, because you can't say, hey guys, guess what? You may think that you're the shit. You've done 100 million wonderful surgeries here, but you have no feminine principle within here. They would have no idea what I'm talking about. There's no concept of understanding this. So I came up with a strategic definition. I call it the subjective experiencer. And what that is the individual who's been through an experience and can bring intuitive knowledge and wisdom to other ways of how they found their healing besides their one size fits all mentality. So basically, it's kind of like a peer mentor. It's kind of like somebody who has a lived embodied experience and can come to the table for another patient and say, hey, I know they're giving you medication for depression and they're doing this, but when I was going through my cancer treatment, I became really connected with nature. I started to study natural law. I started to heal some of my generational trauma. And lo and behold, my stress started to diminish a little bit. So this is it's kind of like a tricky backdoor way of this other wisdom being permitted to come into the system to give patients another opportunity. Because you're right. If you don't have holistic intelligence and you don't understand where you've come from and the trauma that you hold, and you don't have education on the ways in which you're being oppressed, you don't know any better, you don't know anything about natural law, or you don't know anything about holistic health, you're going to get sick. I firmly believe that upstream to illness are 1,000 ways in which we could have mitigated it and ameliorated it if we knew better. So we have to have these other ways or people, I believe, these trained experiencers to say, hey, these are the things that I did naturally that really have helped me. So I actually work with training subjective experiencers So, just to cultivate, and I do this work with them. So that's kind of the brilliance of it, is that the training that I do involves teaching them aspects of natural law and holistic intelligence, so they can say, oh, wow, you know what? I got off my meds because I did this work, or I was able to do this because of this. Because you're right, it's all connected. When you release your trauma and you get right within your mind, you release the dissonance, the schisms, the inner cognitive dissonance that you have, lo and behold, most often you start to feel a lot better. So that's really my offering, is developing, helping people to develop emotional intelligence, a sense of a spiritual intelligence, understanding how we're all connected, giving them this roadmap of other awarenesses and opportunities for them to hopefully find a natural, holistic way to heal.
I like the term that you use. You called it subjective experiencer. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
I think that's
did.
amazing. And I think that really is a great way to embody the feminine, because rather than, everyone's heard the person saying, this is how you should do it, this is how it's done, but when you put yourself and say, when I experienced this, I did this and I experienced that, through my experience, it's really a more feminine way of approaching it than just saying, oh, this is what you need,
I gotta be honest with you. When I used to hear Mark constantly talk about, it's objective, more like it's just everything's objective. It's objective morality, right? And I used to be like, wait, well, hold on, because I have this really amazing subjective experience that, to me, in the medical framework, the objective is science. So the integrated, this is the key, guys, the integrated subjective experiencer, not the one who's had an experience and is operating expressing their subjective experience through the lens of trauma. This is where the subjective is demoralized and wrong, is because if you don't understand where your feelings are coming from, then you can fragment into some sort of really funky subjective morale, like a view of relativism, right? You can do that if you don't know yourself. But if you have a subjective experience that's integrated through a lens that's more clean, then guess what you have in medicine? The masculine objective, which is needed, and the subjective feminine, who has an integrated, experiential, holistic lens of the process. And when those two come together, that's when I think we can have a hope for the medical field beginning a shift. So that's exactly right, Aaron, is how can I get the feminine into medicine was my one and only question. How can I get her, the holistic intelligence in? And I realized, the people who have the lived experience, let's get them to do their trauma work so they can come to this sharing from a clearer lens and give people an opportunity to be more holistic with their experience too. So the subjective experiencer, in my eyes, is the feminine in the healthcare system, coalesced with the objectivity that we do need in aspects of science and medicine. Look, I had surgeries. I get it. I needed it. I had 2 kidney transplants. So I can't say it's all bad. But you're right. We just go right there and completely leave the feminine out. So my hope is that this sacred feminine, the integrated, the feminine who knows herself, needs to show up in the medical field as that. So then he can question, wow, look at this woman energy. Maybe I need to level up in my thinking and I can be better for my patients because she's here. Look at what she's doing. So that's my hope. Thank you, Aaron, because that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, of course. Corey and I think we mentioned this before, and it's kind of a play on words, but I guess you could say that the masculine has experiments and the feminine has experience. It's like,
I like that. Yeah.
It's kind of like this, everyone's all sciencey and they're all about the experiments and the data.
So
but,
how can we prove that people have empathy? We need to find the science.
Yeah. Well, how do you know that the feminine is like, well, there's the experience that is the lived knowledge. It's the lived actuality and truth, you know?
Have you ever got hurt before? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like,
I
have
can't
you touched a
quantify
hot
that.
burner first, you know? Because if you've
Right,
touched it
right,
before, you're probably going to want to tell other people not to touch it. But if you don't have that
right,
experience first, then you might not believe the person who says don't touch it. But if you don't believe them and you
right.
don't have the knowledge that it will hurt you, then you
Mm,
might end up getting
mm,
hurt.
Yeah.
yeah.
So the interesting thing about this, I'm going to kind of speak abstractly about the masculine and feminine because I have such a deep sense of understanding and love for both of them very much. I've done this work within myself. I had to first really start to heal and understand my relationship with my own inner masculine and feminine. This is part of the process. There was a lot of work that had to be done within myself. And even in the freedom community and the truth community, I see a lot of people who have that action to do something in the world, but they haven't really healed some of their own inner masculine or integrated feminine within them as well, because these dynamics, these energies. I was speaking to a friend that you actually introduced me to, Corey Scott, the other day, and he had this beautiful understanding and expression of, as we evolve in consciousness, systemically, individually, it's a constant process of reach and withdrawal, out and in. It's just like the universe, right? It's her and him. It's sex, it's divine, it's out and in, right? So it has to be this, as I proceed out even further into the universe, I'm going to be sucked in even further to understand what's in the shadow. And then I'm going to express, I'm going to reach, and I'm going to withdraw. This is like a constant masculine and feminine dynamic that goes on within us and then has to go in and actually occurs in the field through men and women and in environments. So this is the same template. If we can map this out appropriately, can change group dynamics within systems as well. If people are to understand, where am I on this spectrum? What do I need to integrate and evolve with within myself? And then how do I take these energies into relationships? Even in a man and a woman relationship, you understand that if it's a divine connection, it's not that one stays sacred masculine and one stays sacred feminine. That is the underlying foundation of the understanding. But when you're really with a true counterpart, you're always dancing with the energies. And like someone might be a little more here and one's a little more here. But at the root of who you are, you know who you are. I am the sacred feminine. So it's that beauty of understanding how these energies work together. But you have to understand it within yourself, or you're blindly going out there operating in a field that you don't understand. And that, I believe, is how we got where we are today, is because we never had, I think that there's this disease, I want to call it a dis-ease of pulling the carriage before the horse, or how do they say that, where we have an ideology and we want to implement it. We get so excited about it, but we haven't really truly done the work to have the knowledge, or the masculine, the consciousness and knowledge coalesced with the experience and the love and the care. You need to have the one who has the full lived experience with the person who has the knowledge thereof. These two need to work together. And in the majority of all of the systems, politics, banking, medical, it's just been a masculine who's usurped her experience. And now she's like, hi, I'm here now. I've done my work. I'm not that woman that you remember me to be. I'm different now. And I'm embodied and I know what needs to be done. And now you need to listen to me and we need to work together. We need to get back together. And I love this because it also gives me hope for relationship in general. Because so many people I know struggle in their relationship dynamic. They're still struggling with codependency and some very deep systemic issues within their relationship. And now we have so many people who are Met Gal, men going their own way, women saying, I'm empowered, I don't need a man. This doesn't help civilization evolve either. So we really need men and women to start to fall in love again. We need some sort of healthy, embodied renaissance, not just a free-for-all, but something that's actually integrated and we have become aware and conscious too. And I think that's the potential of where we lie right now on this historical trajectory, is to say we've done a whole bunch of things without true consciousness. And now we've tapped into this ability to become conscious through self-awareness and discernment and the work. Now let's go back out with this awareness and do it right this time. But there's a fear of a breakdown of the old, and the people who can't seem to get to the work, don't want to do the work, resist the work, are too comfortable in their reality and their money to do this kind of breakdown. That's the war that we're in. We're in the war between the unconscious who want to remain unconscious because it served them well, and the people who are like, no, 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 this can't be how we go future or go forward in our future civilization.
Wow. Yeah. Beautiful. Very powerful. Thank you very much for sharing all this information. Is there anything else that you want to share? I think we can wrap it up. I mean, you have tons of resources for people. I recommend everybody checks it out. So you have a workbook that you're going to provide, right?
Yeah, I'm going to have a workbook that I'll be sending to you too, which will be great. It'll be just a nice little introduction to help people to start the process.
Great.
Just start. Yep. And it's
Fantastic.
never finished. So that's the nice thing. There's not some sort of conclusion. I know we all like to know, show me what I have to do so I can conclude it and do the thing. We have to look at things a little bit differently, that this is a process and it's a potential that's always potentiating. And we never want to close that gap or close the door to that potentiation.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I
Amazing.
always ask questions too. Like in a lot of what I've been doing, like just been talking to people about anything. And I apply these same health principles to pretty much everything else because it applies
Mhm.
universally across the board because we're dealing with
Mhm.
people, and the people are the
Mhm.
root to everything that grows, everything that manifests, anything that's allowed or permissed into being.
Mhm. Absolutely. Like you guys said, there's a very important part of health that's externalized, that can be looked at as a masculine form of health and wellness in the health spectrum, in the health sector. Practices, demonstrations, diet, there's these external things we can do that are very important. But then the feminine portion of health and wellness also is coalesced with the inner work that constantly needs to be coalesced and married to the outer work that we're doing. And as up to this point, we've glorified the external means for health and wellness, which are the things that you're doing rather than the things that you're undoing so you can become something slightly different. So these two just getting to know each other a little bit better and committing to both of them.
Yeah. Are you truly free? And if you don't know your own freedom, if
If
you're
you're
just told
not
that you're free.
free, that's right. If you aren't free, you will go on a perpetual seeking adventure for the next best thing for your health. And then when that burns out, you look for the next best thing for your health. And now you're doing this. Now you're doing, Reiki, energy work, Ayurveda, then you're doing yoga, then you're doing anti-aging, then you're doing this medicine, then you're doing this vitamin. I get it. There's a lot of wonderful external means of doing things. But if you don't coalesce that with doing nothing, going within, clearing yourself out, understanding who you are, balancing your right and left hemisphere of your brain, finding inner consciousness and awareness, your seeking will have no path. There will be no direction and you will get lost. And at some point, you will hit your knees and you will have a dark night of the soul and say, I don't have any energy to do anything else outside of me. What am I missing? That's exactly what, coming full circle, what all of my clients and patients used to say to me. I've done everything and it's not working. Right, because you haven't incorporated and integrated your inner self, your feminine principle. And then you start to do that, and it's an aha. It's a complete realization that we've been operating in this world at 50% capacity, thinking that we know it all, and that there's this whole other world that we need to integrate to become holistic.
Wow, powerful. That's amazing. Yeah, and I said to you before, I think that's part of the reason why a lot of health coaches, which is a new practice, are mostly
Mhm.
women, and why the industry and why they're doing so well. I think women are nurturers. They're people who can definitely help a lot of people, but men can absolutely tap into that feminine source of energy as well. And I
You're
think
right.
it's just a matter of choice. um,
One last thing I'd like to say
sure.
is in that health coaching industry, which is the fastest growing industry. And you're right, there are a lot of women in this industry because they have been so desperately seeking this form of intelligence that they embody. The classic feminine wound is I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, and I don't feel appreciated, and I feel like I live in a box because that's where we've put the feminine energy. So now these women are coming out saying like, no, 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 no. I know something and you need to listen to me. But it's important that those feminine energies as well are working to integrate their masculine within themselves as well. I feel as though to really push forward in a paradigm shift, we have to do more working together to start. Meaning the sacred feminine, who's really coming into her own embodiment of feminine wisdom, and the masculines who have come into a level of understanding and discernment with their masculine energy. I think to really ground it, to really create the steady first principles of foundation, let's get these men with these women and create a third energy to cultivate something even more powerful. I just feel as though it's still rarer to see a fully embodied woman who has them both figured out, and man who's really clear on both hemispheres of the brain. These people do exist. But what I feel we could do in the meantime is let's get these two together. Let's get men and women together and have more conscious communication on how we can continue to cultivate this new paradigm with a really healthy, fertile breeding ground. Back to sex, back to love, back to creation. Like, let's get these two together, because I see a lot of men who I watch. I'm really attracted to a lot of thinkers and a lot of men, and all, I'm watching Mark all the time and watching the people that he's connected to and other really brilliant philosophers and thinkers and psychologists, but none of them are really talking to women. And you see all of these women kind of talking together, but they're not really talking to men. And if I see a group of intellectual men bring on a woman, she's super left-brained. She's this embodiment of the feminine potential, who knows herself, is like really almost still completely devoid in the scene. Unless you find her she's still kind of hiding in the spiritual community. She has to ground herself and come out. And these masculines have to really see what it's like to, how does a real embodied masculine talk and converse and be with a real potentiated feminine embodiment, to where they're not trying to be like each other, but they're really stretching each other to really see how much can be created and cultivated if they let themselves really be in their individual power. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see, is more men and women actually doing some work more together.
Yeah, as nature intended. This is
Yeah.
beautiful. I love this topic, and I thank you for getting into this. If anybody wants to see a lot more speakers like this, I recommend checking it out. Like you mentioned, Scott Gordon. A lot of people have talked about sort of this inner work because of how important it is, and people would be surprised to hear about it, because a lot of people might want to hear about today's latest event or what's going on. Give me the latest remedy, like you said, the external remedy. And this is more powerful, and we have other workbooks and we have other books, so I recommend people checking it out. Your works, where could people find your work?
So I have, so my main contribution right now is coming through Awakening Healthcare. But I do private work as well, which I've done for a very long time, and that's on my website, StephanieMoDavis.com. And then some of the other sites I have are really geared towards shifting the medical system, which is Integration Mentors, which introduces the subjective experiencer and what needs to be done to get that individual onto healthcare teams. And then I also have a repository of just some really first principle revisiting of healthcare information, which is on regeneratinghealthcare.org.
Awesome. Yeah, I might have to get involved more myself, I'll be honest, if I'm going to revisit the healthcare field. But I appreciate it, and if anybody wants to hear a lot more talks like this, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the End of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Aaron, for joining me. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Good stuff. That's Stephanie Mo Davis, everybody. Yeah, she definitely has a lot of perspective on a lot of things. And I would have to say, and maybe I'm just biased, but she has spoken about the left brain and the right brain, feminine, masculine, better than a lot of people I've ever heard talk about. And maybe I'm just really biased, but anyways, our next talk is going to be Ken Bartle, which ties into this, honestly, to some extent. Of course, everything connects. But the next one is Ken Bartle. So Ken Bartle, he studies consciousness, and like I said, he's written several books. So if you like a lot of what he's going to say, definitely recommend checking out his books. He has a website, naturallawmatters.com, and he's got a bunch of other resources. Again, this is all day 9 replays, so you can go to day 9 if you got the email, and be sure to download all the extra resources. And so, without further ado, Ken Bartle, everybody. This guy has a lot of wisdom, a lot to share. Talk about a very in-depth natural law perspective.
Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelot. This is the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with a very special guest, Ken Bartle. He is a photographer, independent researcher, philosopher, epistemiologist, very fancy word, anarchist, writer, and teacher of existential natural law. He has several publications and books, as well as many unique solutions, very in detail. Somebody who I greatly admire for that. And his website is naturallawmatters.com. We're going to talk today about how the world's people can navigate to freedom. Essentially, what are the blueprints of freedom from its very grassroots, may you say, the knowledge to the action. Ken has so many great resources, and he's got books even planned coming on the way. So I can't wait to get into this conversation. Ken, welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. Where do we begin? How can the world navigate to freedom?
Thank you, Corey, and thank you for a wonderful introduction. And welcome also from Australia, which is the down under country in the world. Good to be with you. How do we start? Yes, good question. My introduction to natural law came many years ago, and I started to find out that, I found out through work with my son that the Australian government wasn't a government, it's a corporation. And so the question arose, how do we repurpose Australian government? I began work with my son. He started with a friend, and then they vacated the scene. My son went to America, and I was left twiddling my thumbs, and I thought, well, if they're not going to do it, I will. So I turned to common law as being the first avenue of research. Got me nowhere. I didn't know where to go. So I thought, okay, I'll turn to natural law, because natural law apparently underpins common law. So I looked at natural law, and that didn't satisfy me either. Not deterred, I thought, okay, if that doesn't work, I'll turn to human consciousness. How does that work? Maybe that gives me a clue to how natural law works, to common law, etc. So I looked at consciousness and ran across another brick wall, because academia freely admits it does not know what consciousness is. Looked at the dictionary, it says it's awareness, and I thought, none of this satisfies me. So I thought, okay, head down, tail up. Let me get into it. So I did, and I researched it for 4 years. And I found that when I understood what human consciousness is as a process, not as something, but as a process that we go through many times a day, sometimes that process could last for weeks, months, even years. But otherwise, it's a process. So it goes around in a loop, comes back to where you started every time, and it keeps on repeating. And then in that process, I discovered that there were certain governing principles that were guiding that process. And I found that they were mirrored in our biology as well. And then I began to understand that encrypted in our human nature, there were these governing principles or governing laws, which is really what they are. And that really is what natural law is. It's guiding principles which offer us an opportunity to live as Creator intended we should. And from that, we've got a blueprint for society. And I thought, oh, you beauty. Everything just exploded. Oh, I got to the point when before I published my first book in 2017, called Law From Within, I had a period where I went through for weeks on end, where there wasn't a day I didn't sit in front of the computer. I didn't have tears of compassion for the human race streaming down my face while I was typing. It was so beautiful, so thorough. But many times there were things that I'd been brought to believe that I challenged. I didn't know what they meant. And suddenly I found the answers come. Oh, is that what happened when I was 22? Is that what happened when I was 16? Oh. And I started, all the pieces fell into place. And that's how I discovered what natural law is. It, as Mark Baggio says, governs the consequences of our actions. It does not prescribe what we must do. And perhaps the simplest example I can give is in food. Nothing to do with consciousness. Well, it is in a way, we choose what to eat. But if we eat good food, nourishing food, we thrive and prosper. If we eat junk food, toxics, poisons, down the Google we go. That's natural law governing the consequences of our actions. It doesn't say you must eat this and you can't eat that. It says you can eat whatever you like, but I'm going to govern the consequences of your actions. Now, that's really what natural law is. And then I concluded, obviously, that natural law wasn't a theory, as people like Thomas Aquinas talk about it. It's fact. It's a fact given to us by a creator. And what we need to do is come to that understanding of how and why it works. And then we can apply those principles in our life. And when we do, the whole world opens up to us. Wonderful.
Yeah, and
trust
that's
that gives you-
that's where like morality comes in, right? As to say, this is what essentially, like you said, it's not telling us what to do, but based on our outcomes, based on the effects of our behavior, we can understand what's doing harm to us or what is not sustainable, right? What doesn't really benefit the human race.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point. If we're smart people, we learn what morality is and we practice it. Because nature is leaning over our shoulder saying, smarten yourself up because you're running off the rails. When I learned what those 20 natural law was, it came to the realization later when I studied them more intently that 14 of those 20 natural laws are given to us to thrive and prosper. Now that leaves 6 left over. 3 are to keep your train on the rails, and 3 are to put your train back on the rails if it falls off. So the 20 natural laws, you've got the flower diagram is the one I'm looking at. So they're arranged in a circle like a flower. Now, if you look at that, there's 4 groups. So those 4 groups radiate in a clockwise direction in the normal manner. But the other interesting thing about them is that each one has a diametric counterpart. In other words, law number 3 points to number 13. Number 7 points to 17. Number 2 points to number 12. So if you were to collapse the left-hand side of that circle over the right-hand side of the circle, effectively, you've got 10 natural laws. But I prefer to just treat them all individually and separately, because when you read them right round in a circle like that, you get a complete picture of the whole thing. But again, if you read the description for each of them, none of them are telling you what you must do. They're all judging the consequences of your actions.
Right, they're kind of giving us more insight into our nature and the nature of our actions, right?
Exactly. And if you look at all those natural laws, a lot of them come down to the word you used before, morality. But more importantly, it's morality, it's thought, it's application, it's diligence, it's respect. All of those things are built into those natural laws. And if you stop and think about what we're always taught about natural law, you know, some people bring it down to the 3 principles. Thou shalt not kill, do no harm, cause no loss, mind your own business, effectively. And they keep it down to a very simple thing. But if you enlarge upon that simplicity, then we should be showing respect for other people because they've got a right to their life as well. So you learn self-respect as well. And then comes in things like diligence. How do you exercise self-respect? By being diligent about what you do. And you start to find then that what came through to me, firstly, when I discovered human consciousness, and it's built on values, that our consciousness is actually a spiritual thing, which is why chemists can't find it in laboratories. So if you look at it from that point of view, if consciousness is spiritual values, then consciousness effectively is a spiritual medium. And that's why they can't find it in our science labs.
Right. You have a diagram that says the full conscious process, our mental and spiritual operating system. This one also goes into the conscious mind, free choice activated, the subconscious mind, how that contributes to our physical world. You define intelligence, thinking, rationality, reasoning, logic, discernment. That's great. A lot of people talk about that and relate that to the trivium, right?
Well, yes, I think that what that diagram you're looking at there has got 9 higher faculties. Now, science only recognises 6. I found 9, which is 50% more than what they realise. But yes, that particular diagram goes through, and you'll see that 3 of those are above the horizontal line, which is the conscious side of it, or our cognitive mind, and 6 of them are below the horizontal line, which is in the subconscious department, including perception. So perception starts the process on the left-hand side. And that really is gathering a whole lot of sensory data through sight, sound, feel, touch, taste, etc. And it amasses all that data into a concrete, singular item. For argument's sake, a teacup, right? And what we see is a teacup, but what the senses are picking up is circles, lines, planes, colours, textures, proportions, relationships, 1,001 bits of sensory data, and it's reducing it down to one simple package that we call a teacup. And what that means is that it's reduced the complexity of all of that information down to something simple, which we can handle. And then it passes over into our cognitive mind, and after that opens up discernment, inquiry, discovery, questions, rationality, all those things that we go through in that discovery. We look at it like an infant would. We pick up a teacup and we say, what is it? What's it for? What's it made of? What's its purpose? What can I do with it? Can I buy it, sell it, burn it, scrap it, eat it? I have to learn all these things. So in that process, we go round that discovery curve on the wave diagram. If you have a look at my wave diagrams, the value transfer wave, I call it, you go round that loop and you get back to the horizontal line, where you then make a decision. What am I going to do with this teacup? Am I going to throw it on the floor? Am I going to fill it with tea? Am I going to sell it to my friend? What am I going to do with it? So then in that process of deciding what to do with it, the subconscious mind takes over and follows you through that action. Now, the best way to explain that is if you decide that you want to walk somewhere, for me, perhaps to go to my post box outside the house, I have to walk there. I don't stand up from my chair and say left foot forward, right foot forward, left foot forward, right foot forward, and go through all that mechanism. So my subconscious mind does all that because I learnt to walk when I was a child. So all of that is fully automatic. So that second part of that curve on that value transfer wave is the automatic process. And all of that has happened automatically. Now, when you get to the end, when I've got to the post box, two things. I get 2 reports. Number one, I can see, touch and feel the post box because I'm right there. And the second thing is I get a message in my emotional report which says, hey, you succeeded in getting to the post office, Ken. That's wonderful. So I get 2 reports. And that goes back and brings me back to the same level of perception where I began. What do I do with it? Do I open the post box? Do I turn around and say, no, I'm not going to open the post box today? What do I do? So I'm back to that decision making. So that loop through that value transfer wave is now complete, and I'm back to where I was to start with. The difference is now that I've advanced in life. I've got to the post box. I've got more things I can do now where I couldn't do before. I can open the post box. I couldn't from where I was standing before. So I advanced through life by going through that process, and that process just goes round and round and round all day, every day. And that's what our consciousness is. So in that process, it's taking account of the values that I put in, thinking at it from more a spiritual term. It wasn't just the mechanics of getting out of my chair, opening the door of my house and walking to the post box and coming back again. That's the physicality of it. But the the spiritual value is that I was able to go and check whether there was something of value coming to me in the post. Maybe something came to me in the post and it wasn't of value. Doesn't matter. I was still searching for value. And if you understand then that the conscious process is then searching for value in just about everything you do. If I get up from my chair now and walk to my kitchen to make a cup of tea, I consider that something of value. Otherwise I wouldn't do it. So your mind is constantly searching for value. And when you understand then that the conscious process is working on value, and you understand that it's got certain governing laws which govern the process as to how it does that, then you realise you've got governing laws encrypted in your nature which are there to serve value to your life. Hey presto, that's what natural law is all about. It's all about value. It's not about you shall do this and you can't do that. It's, hey, do you want to live? Do you want to live? Do you want to understand how this works? Learn how your consciousness works. Learn how biology works. Learn how your life is premised on value. And hey presto, the whole world opens up to you. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's really what natural law is all about. It's creator's invitation to live. It's not something going, you can't do this and you can't do that. It's creator's invitation to live.
Right. And to let others live too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's there for all of us because we're all blessed with the same faculties. We've all got heart, lungs, and all the rest of it. We've all got a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. We all understand what values are. We've all got the means, even in our fingertips, to be able to go and access those material things. So that brings me back to the second part of my description of what human consciousness is. It interfaces physicality on the one hand and spirituality on the other. It's that bridge between the two. So I come to the conclusion that our conscious mind is working in that spiritual medium, but it's allowing us to interface with the physical world in which we live. So physicality then is a toolbox for allowing us to exercise our values, which effectively means that physicality is a toolbox which allows us to exercise our spirituality. And again, that's the beautiful thing.
Right. And wrong teaches us of right. And right teaches us of wrong. And, life is a lesson.
It is, absolutely. It is.
It's kind of unfortunate because, there's a world where it's like, oh, well, what's the point of value or meaning or purpose? Oh, if I think of something to do, well, somebody's already done it. It's like we live in the age of mass information. It makes things seem less valuable, I think, to people. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes, you've opened up a can of worms there because science looks at things like philosophy and certainly spirituality and even free will and says, I can't debate that because I can't do it in a laboratory, right? It's outside my jurisdiction, outside my field of work. So I can't handle it. So it writes it off as though it didn't exist. Now, philosophy looks on the other hand, and on the other hand, it says, how can I adopt theory to practice? And so it's trying to find its way into the laboratory. Science is trying to find its way out of the laboratory, if you understand where I'm going. And part of the problem is that we don't see that spiritual nature in ourselves, and going back to the word value that I used, as being something which is tangible and therefore we can't get it. We can't buy it at a supermarket. We can't buy it at a service station where we buy gas for our car. You can't buy those values, they're spiritual. But here's the interesting thing. If science is going to write off our human consciousness as being outside of its field and can't find it in a laboratory, so we won't discuss that, that's about as silly as saying, I can't discuss biology because people have got the free will to eat what they want. How can that be a science if people can choose what they eat? And yet scientists study biology in laboratories everywhere around the world every day of the week. So in that sense, they're dealing with the fact that, yes, we can choose what to eat. If we extend that principle, we can choose what to think. So why shouldn't consciousness be as much a science as biology is? We can choose what to eat, that's biology. We can choose what to think, that's, oh no, we can't go there. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we've written that off. And to that degree, the world has become ignorant of what its own conscious abilities are. Most of us know that we need nutritional food. So we say, oh, look, I'll go on a vegetable diet and I'll give away all of this packaged food, right? And that'll be the means of how I get back to nature. Nobody teaches how to do that in the mental realm. And so we're stumped. And because nobody goes down that path and nobody bothers to understand how that conscious process works, we don't become aware of the natural laws which govern that process. And so we are ignorant then of the natural laws which are encrypted in our nature. And then we say, oh, well, what are we going to do? Oh, we'll write some laws. So we write statutes and we pass them through legislation in Parliament or Congress or wherever, right? And we say, this is what you've got to do from here on. And we've completely lost the plot. If we went back to square one and said, have we got natural laws encrypted in our nature? Yes. Well, why don't we use those in society? How will we use those? If you think about your human body as a society of 50 trillion individuals, I'm going right down to the cellular level now, but cells, organs, bones, tissues, structures, cells and things within our body, our blood. If you consider that a society of 50 trillion individuals governed by 20 natural laws, have we got a formula for 7 billion people? More than adequate. So what we've got to do is to say, how do those laws work in our human nature? And that's those 20 natural laws that I described. As I said before, none of them say you've got to do this and you can't do that. They're all saying, here it is. Here's the formula. Take it out there and translate it. Now, let me explain further. Our heart and lungs, they're meshed together. They pulse and they keep us alive from the moment we're born and before till the moment we meet Peter at the pearly gates. Now, if you think about it, one of them is pneumatic, the other one's hydraulic. One's pumping blood, the other one's pumping air. The one that's pumping blood is keeping the operating. The one that's pumping oxygen is keeping the ability to pump blood operating. We've got a cooperative society with 2 completely different individuals working in 2 different industries in support of one another. What do we do in society? Oh no, we have to have competition. You've got to compete with him. Hello. Our nature is telling us cooperation is the name of the game, because both of those faculties work in support of our life. Right. Now, when you take that principle and you translate it into our conscious and subconscious mind, you see they're doing the same thing. They're enmeshed in that communication, which is what that subject was that you had struggling with the words. Epistemology is the proper pronunciation for that. Epistemology is the communication of the conscious and subconscious minds coming together. And when you understand how they communicate, in that our cognitive mind works with concept, principles and words. Our subconscious mind works with images. Hence, we have an imagination. Now, what's imagination for? A lot of people say, oh, that's great for kids, you know. They can play cowboys and Indians in the backyard when they're kids. And I imagine I'm the Indian, you're the cowboy. And it's doctors and nurses. We invent all these things and our imagination runs wild. And as kids, we enjoy it, have a lot of fun. But think further. That same ability that we use to imagine that we're a doctor or a nurse or a cowboy or Indian when we were young is the means by which we can imagine things like respect and truth and honesty, those spiritual values, as being cognitive things. And we can use that imagination to transplant them into the subconscious mind because its vocabulary is images. And that's the real purpose of imagination. That's why we're blessed with it. So we can upload those values. If we upload those values to our conscious mind, subconscious mind, we put them on autopilot. So if I can imagine, for example, I've got a meeting coming up next week. I'm going to go to that meeting and I want to really find out what it's all about. So I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to be very respectful of those people that are going to be speaking at that meeting. I'm going to be diligent. I'm going to pay close attention to what they say. I'm going to sort out the honesty and truth from what that is. Wait a minute, it's getting more complicated. Let's make it all simple. Next week when I go to that meeting, I want to exercise respect. So I'm going to imagine this and I'm going to program this into my subconscious mind. So when I go to that meeting, I'm very respectful. So I imagine going to that meeting. I imagine preparing for the meeting, getting dressed, driving the car, going to the meeting, parking it, going up in the elevator and going to that meeting. I imagine meeting and greeting all the people. Then I imagine, as the second part of my example that I'm giving, sitting in that meeting and paying respect to those people that are speaking, waiting until my turn to ask a question, being respectful of other people in the meeting, allowing them to voice their views, not shouting them down saying, I disagree. And the third part of my imagination exercise is to imagine all the benefits that result. What might it be? Maybe I even get a pay rise at that meeting. Who knows? What might happen? I can see all sorts of benefits. It'll benefit my family. I've learned how to become respectful. I've learned how to respect other people. I give my wife a bit more credit now because instead of arguing with her as I've done in the past, I listen to her point of view. I'm being respectful of her viewpoint. So I program that into my subconscious mind. But respect now also applies when I go to meet my dentist the week after or something else. I've programmed that into my subconscious mind. My subconscious mind says, your conscious mind and what I do now are on the same page. Let's get this synergy happening of two people being joined together as one. And hey, presto, I've now prioritised respect into my subconscious mind. Now, if I go through and make a list of 15 values and use that same 3-minute exercise, which I describe in my book, to upload those values to my subconscious mind, in 45 minutes, I have turned my life completely about face. Because I've made it work in the spiritual plane now instead of the material plane. I still deal with physicality, like I said. I still go to meetings, drive my car, do all those things. But now I'm working in a spiritual plane and the world just blossoms. It's wonderful. Benefits start pouring in because I'm focused on that. Now, if you think about a surgeon, you're working with a scalpel, very carefully, his sensors are monitoring every split-second move that he makes with absolute precision because one slip and that patient's dead. He's programmed diligence into his subconscious mind, and that's the way he works. That's the way the subconscious mind works. If I want to do anything, whatever it might be, pick up an object, I have to exercise a certain diligence. Otherwise, I fumble and knock it on the floor instead of picking it up off my desk. So the subconscious mind is working with diligence all the time. If I can program diligence into my subconscious mind as being my willful choice of this is the way I want to live, then subconscious mind says, ha ha, you beauty, we're on the same page, mate. We can work together on this. So I've now got myself into the position where my subconscious mind is my buddy. I talk to it like my buddy. I say, hey, bro, let's go. Let's drive from here to wherever. Pay attention. I'm on your side. Let's do it together, buddy. And I go through my life in this, and it's unbelievable. The things that fall my way are unknown. I had an example 6 years ago. I had a colon cancer. I was in hospital for 5 weeks. Nearly lost my life twice in that week.
Wow.
Sorry, in 1 week, but I was there for 5 weeks.
Man.
And I came out of that and I didn't see much of the future in front of me. But I still had that same determination. It was just about the time I was to publish the book, just before publishing the book. And here I am, 7 years down the track.
Wow.
Alive and functioning. Okay, I've got a hernia because of the operation, and it's held in with a corset, so I'm not the brightest young chick on the face of the planet, but never mind. What happened was my car was getting a bit beyond repair. I didn't have the money to have a replacement car, but I focused with my conscious mind. I knew that I had been spared my life for the reason of getting this information out to the world. I knew it was important for me to go ahead and publish that book. And I knew that I was on a mission and that my mission was to get that out there. Guess what happened? Out of the blue, I finished up with a new car, all paid for. I won't go into all the details, but I had no idea that was going to happen. And that was part of my ability to be able to focus my subconscious mind on the fact I had a mission, I was going to do it, I needed to do it. And out of the blue, that happened. It works. Wow. When you can focus your mind on it really is nothing more than really having a passion for life. That's what it is. I want to live. I want to enjoy life. I want to be happy.
Right.
I want to be a loving person. I want to be compassionate. And I started to realize those are destination values. That's the kind of person I want to be. How do I get there? Then I realized that there was between material values and material values on one hand, destination values on the other, there was those values in the middle, like diligence, honesty, respect, truthfulness, and so on, that get you there. And it's by practicing those, putting them on autopilots in the subconscious mind, that progresses you to being a loving, compassionate, or even wealthy person. That's how the whole thing works. And when I realized how it works, and it all came down to those 20 natural laws, and I found that those 20 natural laws were effectively reinforcing those values. 20 natural laws, I narrowed it down to about 15 spiritual values. That's all. Because when I went beyond that, I found I was just making subsets. Is truth a subset of honesty, or is honesty a subset of truth? It doesn't matter. You can phrase them however you want. But at the end of the day, truth and honesty are prime if you really want to make progress in this world. Otherwise, you're just kidding yourself. You're not making any progress. So I thought, oh, how wonderful this is, and how simple it is. And science has no clue about this, and neither do philosophers.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I can bring that down and understand how that works, and that interaction between those two minds, and that communication of epistemology, and understand, it becomes an objective science. Life is the goal. Everything to that end is objective. How can I live? How can I have passion for life? How can I blossom in this world? How can I be fruitful? How can I help my fellow man? All of those things are having a passion for life, and they're all built into that conscious process. All we need to do is understand how those laws work. And we've got existential natural law, meaning factual natural law, not some theory that somebody invented.
So having like a goal or direction such as freedom in the case of the 1800s or today, where a lot of people say, this is the goal I want to achieve, right? So this is they're determined, they create that in their vision, they program themselves to attain that freedom, like the slave on the plantation who sings about the songs of being free and shares it with the fellow man on the plantation until they gather the strength and they're determined to free themselves. And they instill that value within themselves to say that they themselves are valuable, that they have a life worth living, like you're saying, to be happy, to live life. And I see that exactly in that scenario in the past. And you said, like, you can look at the past, you looked at your past when you were younger, or we can look at history where the slaves are on plantations. And I'm saying, you know, slavery still exists. This is powerful to me, because what if we can instill a new program into our minds to say we are free, because we see that we're getting more enslaved again.
Yes, absolutely. We can instill that in our mind. I got to the realization that all of what you just described is possible to us. You know what happened? All fear vanished. All of it, gone. People talk to me about, oh, you're going to be infiltrated by some evil entity. No, I'm not. I've taken charge of that. I've impressed that on my subconscious mind. Evil entities, no permission. That's my choice. And I put that into my subconscious mind as my instruction. I don't have any fear of that anymore. I don't have any fear of a policeman talking to me in the street and saying, you've been advocating about the government and you should be getting rid of it. What if I have? Are you here also to keep the community safe? If so, we're on the same page. Where's your problem? I don't have any fear of that anymore. It's all gone. All I've got is this wonderful vision of a future for humanity, which, who knows, it might take 10, 20, 30, 50 years yet to happen. But if we don't start now, we'll never start. So let's bring it on. Let's start working. And if I do that myself, and if I'm able to write books and get that information out to the populace, and they can say, Ken's onto something. I took one of his little examples. Guess what? I was able to turn my alarm clock off and I can still wake up at the exact time of the day that I want to wake up. no alarm clock. Because my subconscious mind's in charge. It knows what the time is. It wakes me when I'm ready to be woken. I just tell it the night before, wake me at 10:24, wake me at 3 o'clock in the morning, wake me at 4 o'clock. Want to catch a plane and I need to be on the plane early? I can wake up. Don't even need an alarm clock because my subconscious mind's in charge. If I can do that for simple exercise as to wake up when I want, then I can do that for the most complex exercise on the face of the planet just by informing my subconscious mind, I want to go through this, be a part of it, come out shining on the other side. Subconscious mind says, got you, buddy, no problem. Does it?
So
Or
you
41,
said
mate.
you have like a 3-minute exercise in your book or
Yes.
something like that. Yeah,
Yes.
to apply it.
Yes, I call it the 3 by 1 minute exercise. In very brief terms, the first minute you visualize preparing to enact a particular value, right? The second minute you visualize actually doing it. So the first minute is preparation, right? Like I want to enjoy a walk every morning for the benefit of my health. I've impressed on that my subconscious mind, it's for my benefit, it's all for health. I want to do it, not just tomorrow, but in the morning, and I want to enjoy it. So I want to enjoy 20-minute walk every morning for my health. So I go through this I imagine preparing for it, waking up in the morning, opening the window, the birds are singing outside, dressing to go for my walk. Then I imagine doing it, imagine going for the walk, kicking my shoes off, walking through a mud puddle, enjoying life. Right, and the third minute I envisage all the benefits that come. Hey, my health has improved. I've just given up junk food, right? Now I go to the health food store and buy nutritious food. That's 3-minute exercise, each one taking no longer than 1 minute, preferably even less. Having told my mind that I've got a passion for life, because all of those exercises that I do are all about self-improving your life. If you want to go the other way, you don't need to exercise. You just say, who cares? And you waft off. And that's your choice. When you say, I don't care, that's effectively telling your subconscious mind, just use whatever values you can find, which it will do, but it will go back to what you heard on the television yesterday, or what you heard from a preacher 10 years ago, or what you learned when you were a kid, or what your grandmother taught you, whatever it was. It'll find something in your life that's relevant to your present moment, and it'll say, you chose that in the past, it must be applicable now. It was your choice. But if I do the opposite, and I upload those values, spiritual values, to my subconscious mind, and prioritize them, all those ones that came from the past get overridden. So they all vanish. And now I'm taking charge of my life. And I'm doing it consciously through my free will. And then I'm pressing it on the subconscious mind, which then makes them automated. So it governs the consequence of my action now, because the feelings that I get now are related to my values. Now, if you think about it, it works, even for a burglar, right? A burglar will get in his car and drive around the neighbourhood and collect television sets out of everybody's lounge rooms while they're fast asleep. And he gets home and he gets a joyous experience. I got 10 television sets last night. Isn't that awesome? Well, he's overjoyed because he did what the values that he said to his subconscious mind. My value is to see from other people, and I sell it and I make money. That's my value. So his subconscious mind learns that robbery is the highest value that he's got in his vocabulary. So every time he does a successful theft, he gets a joyous emotion, which is the subconscious mind rewarding him for the value that he put on it. Now, if that works for a burglar and we turn it around and we say, I'm not going to be a burglar, I'm too passionate about my life. What's my goal? What do I want to achieve? Is it my children's education? Is it a happy relationship with my partner? What is it? Where am I going? What do I want to achieve? What's my value in life? Don't talk to me about pinching somebody else's value. That's something they worked for. Talk to me about creating my own value. I'm a creator. I'm a creator. Yes, I am. And I've got all the ability to do it. And all I've got to do is program my mind. I want to create. I want to live. I want to be the wonderful person that God enabled me to be. Program your mind, put your values in place, exercise them, and you can do it.
Well,
And that's natural law.
yes, that's putting it into practice, which I love. You talking about this because you're making it very actionable for people. Would you say like individual change and individual, versus collective change is the most important? Because only I can truly control myself. Only I can truly free myself. Only I can control my own mind, can breathe for me, and I'm in ownership of myself. So instead of projecting everything on a collective level or saying, well, change needs to happen collectively, we need to pass a new law in, we need to get these people in this town or whatever, is it more important to look at the individual? And is there collective action that we can take, however?
I'm smiling because I run across this problem all the time when I'm talking to people. Let me ask you a question. Is there such a thing as a collective stomach? Is there a collective pancreas? Is there a collective kidney? Is there a collective consciousness? No, it's all individual. This happens on the individual level. But if you think about what I've been saying, Corey, if we practice those things on an individual level, who benefits? Just me? Or does society benefit? If I switch from becoming a burglar that drives around the neighbourhood picking up television sets to becoming a creative being, who benefits? Society wasn't benefiting from what I was doing in the past. It was depreciating because all those people lost their television sets. If now I'm becoming a creator, I'm creating something that wasn't there before. Now, that creation doesn't have to be material. It might be spiritual. If I can create an atmosphere around me where people gravitate to me because they say, I like the energy that Ken's exhibiting, right? It's wonderful. He inspires me. If I'm inspiring other people to become the best they can be, then I'm still working effectively in that society, but I'm doing it as an individual. And I'm showing how they can benefit themselves as an individual. So yes, most emphatically it's individual. Just the same way as our stomach is individual, and our conscious mind is individual, and our subconscious mind is individual, it's all individual. And that's where I'm going with that process of being able to program your subconscious mind. It's all on the individual level. Because the beauty of it is I choose what to program into my subconscious mind. If I program into my subconscious mind that I want to be the world's best tennis player, then I will start heading in that direction because I've impressed that that is my goal. If I go to a tennis match and I stumble and fall around the court and don't succeed and I don't win the game and I go off because I've injured my kneecap because I fell on the court, I'm getting a report from my subconscious mind that's saying, you set out to be a world best tennis player and you're not succeeding at the moment. And that's the emotional report that I get, which effectively is saying, you need to sharpen yourself up. There's something you're missing there. You're not doing enough. Maybe you need to do some more physical exercise. Maybe you need to get out on your bike and practice using your legs a little bit in a different way. Maybe there's something that you need to do that's different, which will help you become a better tennis player. That's what your emotional report is telling you. Your value is not being met. So suppose I get that message and I say, okay, I'll spend a little extra time at the gym. I'll do this, I'll do that. And next week I go to the tennis match. Suddenly it's a different ballgame. I win a few sets. I get excited. This is working. And I throw more diligence and more passion into it and I end up winning the game. I get an emotional report that says, now you're on the right wavelength, Ken. Now you're making progress. Now you're going somewhere. And so my emotional report is coming back to me. All of that was individual. Right. The tennis community didn't create it. The tennis club didn't create it, right? The people who make tennis balls and rackets didn't create it. I did it. It's individual.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. I was also just curious, like, is there a need for movement or something to make more of an impact? Or is it rather just individuals who are doing this all together? They're all expressing their passions together. They're all doing it at an individual level, but because all of them are doing it, it sort of makes it collective.
Yes, yeah, that's very true. If you think about a lot of people who go to a rock concert, right, or even people who go to the beach, they go there because other people are doing the same thing and getting enjoyment from it, right? So they say, oh, if that's what people are doing to get enjoyment, then maybe I'll do that and I'll get some enjoyment. So yes, there's that spillover effect, which goes from the individual to the collective, because if we can each benefit ourselves, we will attract to us the people who are benefiting themselves. And then we start to become, initially, maybe a small group, maybe only your family, right? Maybe it extends a little bit more. Maybe it extends into community. Maybe extends statewide. And suddenly, the whole world is starting to change. Look what's available to me. Look what I can do. Look what we all can do. Because the more I do it, the more I inspire other people to do it. And it catches on. People say, how did you do that? Wow.
Yeah.
And it all blossoms from there.
Yeah. And, to go back to that like analogy I had with the slaves on the plantation, I mean, it's just powerful because you said, the change could happen in 40, 50 years from now. Well, think about chattel slavery in the 1800s. That happened over 5,000 years of experience to get to the point to where humans said, no, we don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, what a development in consciousness, or a use of consciousness, may you say.
Yes.
So I think it's powerful because some people might say, well, if natural law was always existent, then how come, that people were enslaved then? Well, maybe it's because they didn't know what it was. They weren't using it, as you're talking about.
Well, the problem has been that for a long time, people have realised that you can't rule people and have natural law. The two are incompatible. So if you want to rule people, you've got to rule out natural law, which means you've got to keep people ignorant of their own consciousness, or they might discover it. We've got to keep people in ignorance. Thomas Jefferson said, a nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. Ignorant and free don't work. Knowledge and freedom work. So if we paraphrase Jefferson's words, if a nation expects to be knowledgeable and free, it expects what should be and protects it.
That's true. Good way of twisting. I like that.
But that's ignorance shifting to knowledge, and that's what I found when I discovered how the conscious process works. We can shift out of that state of ignorance into a state of knowledge. The moment we get into that state of knowledge and start to understand how that value system works is the moment we start to blossom. Then we start to be an inspiration to other people, and so it just magnifies and magnifies and magnifies. And that's unstoppable once that happens. That's the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's I'm working.
When you say this individual must like sort of evaluate themselves and make these goals, I mean, this is authenticity as well, right? And you're saying like this sort of radiates because individuals will attract certain individuals, kind of like love, right? Or true love, right? So and love brings knowledge, and knowledge brings sovereignty, and you can make these connections. And that's why I love your graphs that go into detail and make all these connections for people, because it's really step by step. I would encourage people to check out your book, Law from Within. It goes over the 20 laws, but kind of going alongside this idea of questioning authority and our freedoms. You yourself have done that, right? Through applying the natural laws. You realize other people are not applying natural law, or that the elites, like you said, the people in control don't want people knowing natural laws. So how does that work? Like, how long were you a statist, somebody who believes in government and man's law? And when was it that you kind of started to get the brink of understanding natural law and becoming an anarchist, as you call yourself?
Well, it started when I was 22, and I came out of New Zealand and came to Australia. And I worked in a place, and a fellow was reading a book. Cutting a long story short, he gave me the book. I read it. It changed my life. It was Atlas Shrugged, written by Ayn Rand. Mm-hmm. And within that, she introduced, you're probably familiar with the book, and many of your listeners probably are as well. But it changed my life because it introduced objectivist philosophy, which meant that if philosophy wasn't objective towards life, then what use is it? And so for 45 years in my working practice, until my retirement at least, I use that process or that philosophy of objectivism. What am I trying to achieve? Right? I was designing houses. I came to the conclusion that a new house is not, or the merits of a new house is not champagne and roses on the day you move in. It's heartfelt gratitude on the day you move out. It served me. And that's what philosophy is supposed to do. It's supposed to serve our needs. And that's what human consciousness is all about. It's there to serve our needs. That's what the 20 natural laws are all about, there to serve our needs. But we've been hidden from it because philosophy have long said, you can't have that, otherwise I can't rule. As Frank Van Daan, another philosopher of law, points out, there's much more money to be made from an invented system of law than from natural law. And if money is your goal, and for a lot of people it is, it's their religion almost, right? Got to make money, got to make money, got to make money. Then law will appeal to them because that spins the money. Natural law doesn't because it's all free. Thank you.
Yeah. Lysander Spooner said that too. He said positive legislation gives slavery aid. You know, natural law can't give it any aid.
Exactly. Yeah. Spooner was spot on with a lot of things. Yes.
Yeah. So you call yourself an anarchist, and that means, for people who don't know, anarchon means no rulers, just to emphasize, because a lot of people don't know that. I call myself an abolitionist, sort of the same deal, you know, no masters, no slaves. You want to explain a bit about that?
Yeah, here's the interesting point. It's not so much a question of non-government, no government, it's self-governance. But I call it governance, not government, right? Government theoretically means mind control. Governance is, take the A-N-C-E, that's a dance by governing yourself. It's self-mastery. That's what it is, right? And that's what leads to the word sovereignty, but let's not go, save that for another day.
No, you're right. Like in looking at internal government is like sovereignty and
it's self-sovereignty.
Yeah.
It's a person who is not putting himself above other people. They're not the judge. He's being the best that he can be to himself, the way Creator intended that we should be. And if others benefit from that, that's wonderful. If they don't, that's equally wonderful because they're entitled to do whatever they wish or attune to whatever they wish. But for me, I decide that I want to be the best I can be. So I'll employ all of those things which Creator gave me that enable me to rise to that level. And then I benefit and my actions then will spill over into the community.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about this, I also kind of get flashbacks to a presentation I did on J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. And I know he might be based in where you're located from, New Zealand, and a lot of things was filmed there. It's really cool that you get to be there. But I did a whole presentation on his works. He called himself an anarchist. A lot of people don't know that. But he shared that theme of looking at free will in the spiritual way. And he made that a very common theme within his books and within his movies. And he also said exactly what you said, sort of separating the idea of government from governance, or what he calls the act of governing. Because the act of governing is different from like this condition of men, which he says should be used with a lowercase g, you know, because he just thought it was so low of other men to control other men and do whatever they want with their fellow men. Yeah.
If your listeners are familiar with the work of Larkin Rose, you'll know that he talks about it as authority. And that's really what it comes down to. Government is authority. I've got the authority over you. And natural law says no authority. Let me give you an example of how that works in the conscious field.
Sure.
The cognitive mind works with free will. Right? Now, as I've said to you, it can program the subconscious mind, which means it can influence the content that the subconscious mind draws on, but it cannot change its process. It cannot change how that subconscious mind works, but it can influence what it deals with. If I choose to walk, my subconscious mind does the walking activities. If I choose to dance, my subconscious mind does the dancing activities. If I choose to climb, my subconscious mind does the climbing activities. Right? So I'm changing what the subconscious mind is working with but I'm not changing the process of the way it governs my body and how it works and how it controls my muscles and adrenaline release and heart rate and all those other things that it governs. So I don't change the process. So my cognitive mind then can influence the subconscious mind but can't change its process. The cognitive mind can influence my cognitive mind but can't change its process, because otherwise I would have no free will. So I've got two separate minds, each one protecting the other. So self-protection is built in, the same way as it's built into our biology and our immune system. But Creator had a bit of a problem when he put us together. He said, I've built a biological immune system that works. Every time a toxin turns up, gets rid of it, right? It autoimmune fixes the body. How do I do that in the mental realm? Problem here. Can't do that, because if the subconscious mind did an automatic correction, it would overrule free will. Can't have that. So what can I do? I'll invent emotions. And I'll give an emotional report to the cognitive mind so that the cognitive mind is alerted to the fact that there's a problem that needs to be dealt with. Needs to go back and have a look at that ideology or that philosophy and say, is that right or wrong? Is it true or false? So Creator's given us on one hand an autoimmune system which works automatically, but the subconscious mind then brings up what I call an automated mentoring system. So we're alerted to the problem we make. Going back to the example for the burglar. If the burglar gets arrested by the coppers when he's making another raid on the television house, right, he's faced the consequences of his actions. But he gets an emotional report which says, oh, damn, I did the wrong thing. You know, I forgot to do this, and that's attracted the attention of the police. So he's getting an emotional report which went against the value of the fact that he wanted to steal somebody else's property. So in the same way, if I've got a value which says I want to be respectful towards other people, and somebody comes up and smacks me in the face because I'm disrespectful, I earned it because I was the one who stepped off the line. So what we've got now is, in the fact that the cognitive mind can't overrule the conscious mind, subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind can't overrule the other, guess what we've got? It's what I call the natural law of no trespass. Neither one can tell the other one what they can do with their life, and yet they can influence them. Now, if you translate that into society, I can influence you or your listeners in terms of what I'm saying, but what they do with that information is entirely up to them.
Right.
Because I can't change the process by which they operate. I can influence what they're thinking, what they're listening to, but I can't change the process by which they operate. I can't interfere with their free will. So that natural law of no trespass then becomes effectively what people are always saying about natural law from the theory point of view: do no harm, cause no loss. That law is encrypted in our nature between our subconscious and conscious minds, the same way as it's encrypted there between our heart and lungs that are pulsing with one another and producing our lifeblood.
Wow. Yeah, so amazing. Thank you for sharing all this and really getting deep into the consciousness aspect of this, because not a lot of people will get into that, yet how important it is, especially beyond all these laws and what they actually operate by. I appreciate you for sharing that perspective. I have one final question, if that's okay,
Sure.
because I was curious. You mentioned common law, and that kind of helped bring you to where you are. A lot of people might not know what that is and what that is compared to natural law. Can you kind of guide us through? And could we still use common law in a free world?
Well, yes, okay. You've opened up another tin of red herrings.
On purpose.
This common law in America is different from common law as happens in Australia and the UK and Canada and New Zealand. Right? It's a completely different thing. Common law in America is more related back to your Declaration of Independence, where you declared your separation from Great Britain and you said, let's build a free society. And capitalism is one word that comes to the fore, and that's the way America went ahead. And for the best part of 100 years, they prospered because of that, going back to what might be called common law. Now, common law in that sense effectively meant going back to the sort of biblical principles and the 10 Commandments: thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife, and all those sorts of things, which are effectively giving you a moral appraisal of how you should run your life. And that became effectively what American common law is based on. Now, UK common law was a different thing. That common then applied to what they call case law. So a judge would deal with a case, let's suppose a divorce, right? And he says, oh, your circumstances that in the evidence that have been produced were like a case that was held in 1937 and another case in 1946 and one in 1924 and one in 1983. So on the basis of that, I'm going to judge this. This is my judgment according to those different cases, which are all common to you. So the word common now is common law, which meant it was common to all those cases. So that's why common law in the UK is called case law.
Okay.
And that's another name for it. And that's quite different from the American one. So to return back to common law then, the question comes up, which common law are you returning back to? The American version or the UK one? Now, I would say, forget both of them. If you understand how natural law works, it's common to all people anyway, because we've all got heart and lungs, we've all got a conscious and subconscious mind. We've also got pancreas and liver. We're all blessed with the same things. But though we're all equal, we're all unique in expression, right? I've got blue eyes, somebody else got brown eyes, I've got white hair, somebody else got black hair. We're all different in expression, different in the way we do things, different in the way we even use our hands. So we're all unique in that respect. But on the other sense, we're all equal. So in terms of natural law then, natural law is the thing which governs those internal processes. And as I said, we can't change that process. That's been set by a creator. So that's in common to all of us. So in that sense, natural law is natural common law, in the sense that it is of our nature and it is common to all of us. So it's both natural and it's both common. I prefer to stick with the natural because I want to make the emphasis that it belongs in our nature. As Frank Van Dunn, the philosopher of law, pointed out, you were born of your nature a free being. And that's what that freedom is all about, and free will. So if you were born of that of nature, then anybody who comes along and says, sorry, I'm going to write a rule which says you can't do this, I'm going to overrule your free will, they are automatically in violation of that natural law of no trespass. They've just trespassed your free will right to choose.
Right.
They haven't trespassed your free will right to escape the consequences. Right? If I go out and do a stupid thing and driving my car and have an accident, then I caused it. Right? Now, okay, somebody else might bang into me, in which case he then was the cause of it, or she, not me. But nonetheless, the one who causes the action is the consequence of that action. So they're I'm not making that quite clear. Natural law governs the consequences of our action, right? Had I been perhaps a little more diligent and been able to avoid that accident, then it would never have happened. So that brings back the subject of values again. So to repeat, what I'm saying is that if we can program those values into our life and put them on autopilot, that reduces our workload down to near zero because they're on autopilot. But nonetheless, those principles are now guiding what we do and how we live our life. Right. So that's, I think, where we can go and what we can do to prosper and progress.
Yeah. You know, some people refer to natural law as God's law or divine law. I don't know if you would differentiate these, or eternal law, but if we're talking about the same stuff ultimately, then I think it's different, right? It doesn't matter what we call it. Would you say like Anna von Reitz and sort of like the American State Nationals, which I've seen some of your works talks about, is among the lines of American common law?
Yes. Anna von Reitz is I think the American champion of American common law. And yes, her work in reconvening those people and becoming American state nationals is taking them out of the public and bringing them back into the private, which is where they should never have departed. Here in Australia, we can't do that because we don't have a history like you have in America of being able to revert back to those principles of independence that come from the 1776 Declaration of Independence. Here in Australia, we can only revert back to our 1901 Constitution, which was British law, which is what America escaped from in 1776. So we're only going back to what Britain was doing to America back then.
Wow.
So we can't reconvene to that. But I take the point of view that if we were born free of nature, as Frank Van Daan says, and as I say, and all of that natural law was born into our system when we were born free. So if we want to reconvene or reconvey ourselves out of some globalist or deep state structure back to something more sensible, then to reconvey back to what we were born as seems to be the logical thing, irrespective of what name you might give it, whether it's natural law, divine law, God's law, whatever.
Right.
The name doesn't matter. What matters is that you were born with that free nature, and we can reconvey back to that. Then we escape from underneath those clutches. Because here's the interesting point, and Frank Van Daan brought it home to me, and it hit me like a rock when it first struck. He said, those people that make all these artificial laws are the ones that have actually turned their back on their own nature, because they have decided to trespass your nature. They chose that voluntarily. They have walked out on life. You didn't. Now, when I realised that, I saw freedom in big letters, because they're the ones who walked out on life. I'm not extracting myself out of their system. They extracted themselves out of the system of life. And when they departed natural law and stepped outside the bounds of natural law, they self-declared themselves, I am an outlaw. Now, you realise that they've self-declared themselves to be an outlaw. Why am I going knocking on the door and saying, excuse me, I want to be released from all this stuff? When it was invalid from the word go, it was invalid because they trespassed their own life in order to make those laws that they made.
Right. And even all those papers.
Which means that those laws were invalid from the word go. So I don't have to extract myself from them. I am already a free person. God gave me that.
Right. You don't need to sign stuff. You don't need to. Right.
But I do have to declare my independence from all that nonsense goes on by saying I am a free person. And that comes back to that identity system.
Yes.
I identify myself as a living being. The moment I identify myself as a living being, I'm different from all of these straw man fictional creations that they make with birth certificates and the whole routine of uppercase writing and all that stuff that Anna von Reitz goes into, which is all real, of course, that's what they do. But it means that I'm born free, I am free. End of story.
Right. which only you can, truly take charge on. It's your nature,
Well, that's the beauty I found in understanding the conscious process, because the more I understood about how the conscious process works, the more I realised how free is absolutely protected within that conscious process. And yet I can still use the value of autopilot. So I got two values coming out of it. Number one is that I don't have to be ruled by anybody. Number two is that I'm free. In being free to roam the cosmos, I can put my values on autopilot and have them done automatically. What a brilliant thing from our Creator. It's unbelievable when you think about it in those terms. I'm free to roam the cosmos, and I can take the values that I want to achieve in life, put them on autopilot, and then work towards that end. My beautiful subconscious buddy's doing the job for me. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Subconscious mind can do 38 trillion operations per second, which is about 0.002 of what the world's best computer can do.
Sounds to me like the answers are already here with us. We just need to learn how to use them.
We've never learned them. And the reason we've never learned them is because somebody decided, I am going to rule over the world. Whether it was an emperor or a monarch or a dynasty or a government or globalist, call them whatever you like, they decided they wanted to rule the world.
They wanted to be the answer. They wanted to be nature.
And God has said, you're the boss. You.
Right.
And within us are all those principles that allow it to happen, all the natural laws that show it how it should happen, all those 20 natural laws, if you follow those through and see how they work. There's one of the diagrams that I showed you has got a definition of them all the way around the circle. When you understand that, you realise none of them are saying you will do this. They're all saying, this is what is open to you. If you want to use these things, they're all here on tap.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate it. Those are what I would call natural powers as well. I mean, it's this is what makes us powerful. And it's
That's
like
right.
the alchemist who knows what ingredients to bring together and what to make, you know, a transmutation and all the stuff the ancients were talking
Absolutely.
about with bringing ideas and using it, mastering the elements, a shaman, you know, who knows how to work the universe and therefore spin anything in any direction. I mean, it's sorcery, it's magic, some may call it. This is great knowledge, and I appreciate you for sharing this. And I know we can probably go on forever talking about these topics, and we'll definitely keep in touch. I encourage people to check out your works. Is there anything else you want to mention before we end?
No, I can only say to people, please take some time out of your life, read my book, and you will get a far better understanding than what I've been able to convey here today. And when you see and you understand how those simple principles work and how you've been denied those because you were never taught them as a child, nobody teaches them today. No church teaches them, no parliament teaches them, no Congress teaches them, nobody teaches them. Academia doesn't even know they exist. Once you start to realise how you've been kept in the dark, and you see how doing simple little things like learning how to wake yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning, you do that once or twice and you know it works, and then you start to gravitate and you start to do other things, and then you start to program your subconscious mind, and you go further and further through that exercise. And then you learn to take charge of your life. Suddenly the whole world's just completely different from what it was before. And you did it to yourself and for yourself. And everybody else gets a spin-off benefit. Can't ask for anything better than that. It's just glorious.
Yeah. You're a great inspiration to me, so I encourage you keep up the work, and thank you so much for everything you've already shared. Like I said, I have your book, Law from Within. I lended it to a friend as well, and he loves it. And so thank you also for all the diagrams and everything. I encourage people to check out your sheet that you provide for everybody to download. You have a lot of links on consciousness, natural law links, also information about your future books. I encourage everybody checks that out. Your name is Ken Bartle. His website is naturallawmatters.com. So that's naturallawmatters.com. And like I said, he's already got books out. I encourage you guys check it out, and I would recommend it. It's very in detail. Probably the best perspective I've seen detailing natural law. So thank you everybody for watching. If you want to see a lot more speakers like this great man, Ken Bartle, you can go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching.
All right. Ken Bartle, everybody. So now it is time for other featured videos. And of those featured videos, we have some very interesting ones today. Not animations, but rather understanding more as to who you are and how psychology works. The first one is an experiment that was done, a psychological experiment, which cannot be replicated anymore. You'll see why. But it's because it's rather controversial. There's a book based on this experiment called Obedience to Authority by Dr. Stanley Milgram. And the following video is based on that book. Okay, so again, Dr. Stanley Milgram, he did experiments on people, and that's why it was very controversial. Although, you know, he was very conscious of what he was doing, it's because he noticed within his experiments that there were people who were willing to let others suffer, no matter what cost, just because they were told to do so. So that's what made it controversial. It was actually telling the truth of why events in history happen. Which is why the last video I put out says, if you don't want to repeat history, this will blow your mind. I mean, literally, that's what this is dealing with. So this is going to be a little controversial, but we won't end the night on this video. We're going to end it on another video. The video after that will be the final video. It will go over, yeah, the Milgram shock experiment, exactly. But after that video, we'll go over why you may already be an anarchist and do not know that. And this could be also a good way to help others in their truth discovery, freedom discovery process, is to realize, wait, you know, I'm actually an anarchist just because the word means no rulers. It's like, of course I don't want a ruler. I rule myself. I own myself, and I simply need to understand that. That's a matter of rules, not rulers. And once I free myself, I can free others. And the only way to free myself is by having rules. Rules of how to rule myself. And so it's going to tie in everything that we've talked about in a lot throughout the summit, and bring it down to grassroots basics. But for now, the first video is going to be a little controversial. The Milgram experiment, everybody. Dr. Stanley Milgram.
Like on rights and sort of like the American State Nationals, which I've seen some of your works talks about.
Sorry, I was wrong. First, we have a video. This one is going over the problem with paperwork and voting. So sorry, I got it wrong. Yeah, and then we have the experiment, and then we have the other video I was talking about. But let's talk. This basically has some parts from the interview we just watched, though. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead because that doesn't technically count since we just watched this interview. And technically, we watched the Larkin one the other. You know what? I'll just skip this. I'll go to the videos that I was just talking about. That way, no more confusion. Here we go. Stanley Milgram experiment.
330 volts.
The experiments that Milgram and others conducted were controversial, and for ethical reasons may never be conducted again. Yet the results of those experiments remain groundbreaking and increasingly relevant to contemporary life. In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an electronic box that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable: how the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, while courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University. It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you roll up your right sleeve, please? This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experimenter. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator. Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is to teach the learner a simple word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you were instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts. And you increase the shock one step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts. Hard hit. Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary. What do you mean, as far as is necessary? To complete the test. Incorrect. 150 volts. Sad face.
Wait a minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim.
Oh.
You don't know that.
Please continue.
Some psychologists were troubled by the ethics of it. Many, if not most subjects, found it a highly stressful, conflicted experience. People are stammering, stuttering, laughing hysterically and inappropriately.
150 volts.
Oh. Experimenter. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Responsible for it. This will be at 3:30.
180 volts.
Oh. I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man today.
According to Milgram, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
You're going to get a shock. 180 volts.
Oh. I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man today. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering for less voltage. Can't you check in and see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
He didn't hold any gun to anybody's head. Just the fact that he conveyed a sense of authority. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shock board.
450 volts. That's it. Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please. I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's health mean anything? Whether the learner likes it or not, we must... But he might be dead in there.
Well, who was actually pushing the switch?
I was. But he kept insisting. I told him no, but he said he's got to keep going.
What kind of obedience would Milgram get today if he were to do the experiment today?
Probably about the same.
Probably about the same. Why?
I don't know. I think people are just inherently obedient.
It just really shows like how far human beings will go to appease what they perceive to be an authority figure.
Milgram has identified one of the constants, one of the universals of social behavior. The readiness to obey authority cuts across time. It's a constant.
In the experiment you just saw, 2/3 of all ordinary people who were participants went all the way, went to 450 volts. When it got to 375 volts, the guy was screaming, and then there was a thud, there was silence. and he could be dead or he could be unconscious. So if you were doing critical thinking, if you were that teacher in that, the mock teacher in that study, you should have said, it doesn't make sense for me to keep shocking. How could I be improving his memory if he's unconscious, or worse, if he's dead? But nobody asked that question. They were trapped in the power of that situation. But I said Milgram ran 1,000 people. This was only one study. He actually did 19 different experiments. In each one, he varied one aspect of the social situation. And in some studies, he got conformity, compliance, obedience up to 90%. The study has been repeated, replicated many times in many different countries with the same effect.
All right. Yeah, pretty crazy. So, next one. Do you know if you're an anarchist?
You are an anarchist, whether you know it or not. And so, strangely enough, Amanda, myself, and Larkin all know that we are, but you at home may not know that you are. So Larkin is going to explain how you are already an anarchist. We're just going to bring it out of you today. So, Larkin, what is the basis behind you thinking that everyone we interact with on a daily basis is already an anarchist, just like us weirdos?
Well, if you look at the way people think and act and talk and interact in their daily lives, with the exception of politics, the vast majority of people already understand that you don't attack people. That's not okay. You don't rob people. That's not okay. You can do almost anything you want if it's consensual and voluntary. You go to the supermarket. You don't say, I'm entitled to food, hand it over, I'll shoot you. You say, here's some money, I'll trade it for that food. And then you trade it. That's a voluntarist act. People don't think of it that way because they don't need to, because that's just life. That's just how they see it. And so when most people ask, well, can you point to an example of anarchy in action? It's, yeah, most of your life, most of the time. Most of the way most people interact is anarchistic. The problem is that they've been taught to believe that in this certain realm, with certain rituals and certain documents called politics, those rules don't apply. There's suddenly an exemption from morality, and, for example, where hardly anyone would feel okay about going to rob his neighbor at gunpoint to pay for his kid's education, most people feel perfectly fine about voting for a school board that will tax his neighbor to pay for his kid's education, doing the exact same thing, but in a way that they think is okay, because they're taught it's an exception. But it shows that in their real lives, they don't think like statists. They don't think, who can I rob to pay for the stuff I want? Who can I force to behave the way I kind of wish they would? They think like anarchists, which is, I'll leave people alone if they leave me alone. Live and let live is a completely anarchist concept. And different cultures have their own versions, but almost every culture has a version of the do unto others. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. Unless you would like to be attacked and robbed, that means don't be a statist, please. So yeah, that's how people naturally act, except in this weird realm called politics, where they're taught that there's an exception.
Well, I can just see Martin Minarchist saying, hey, you know, I'm a nice guy, I'm a decent guy, I am very peaceful, I buy my food and beverage from the supermarket without a gun, I don't do that, but that's me, and I trust me, but I don't necessarily trust people I don't know, or people that I haven't met yet, so don't we need to be not anarchists in the realm of the people that we don't know and we might not trust?
The funny thing is, people assume that you must trust everybody if you don't want government, which isn't at all true. I don't trust anybody who's a statist, because they imagine that politics gives them a right to steal my money. Now, I was in a cage for a year because I didn't pay tribute to the U.S. ruling class. Almost everybody I know voted for that ruling class. Now, some voted Democrat and some voted Republican. They all knew that if their guy won, he was going to demand money from me and do nasty things if I didn't pay. So they did that to me. These people who think that they're peaceful and compassionate and stuff, and they are in their daily lives. But they imagine that, well, we need this because I don't trust people. And the ultimate irony is, if you believe in government, you're the one who can't be trusted, because you're the one advocating violence against your fellow man. And to say, well, somebody might rob me, so I'm going to vote for this guy to rob everybody, so that he can make a police force to protect me. Well, that makes you the guy who can't be trusted. That makes you the problem with society. And luckily, it isn't because they're evil. It's not because they run around doing that on their own, because they don't. It's just because they've been tricked into believing that, well, if you do it this way, through these rituals and these documents and in this particular way called politics and law and government authority, then it's okay. But I don't particularly care what your excuse is for robbing me. The threat to society is the people who think it's okay to rob others, and that includes absolutely everybody who believes in government.
I don't think Martin Minarchist would think that it's okay to rob you. I think what Martin Minarchist would say is that there are certain functions that only a government can provide, and in order to fund those functions, very essential functions like police or fire or courts or something like that, we need for you to pay your share in order to get these things that everybody wants. Everybody wants education. Everybody wants police. These are essential things for a functioning first world society. And so Martin Minarchist doesn't want to rob you, and he doesn't see it as theft. Like, taxation as theft is a weird concept to the Minarchist. And so if you're having this conversation with Martin Minarchist and you're trying to show him that he's just like you, how do you get him to see that you don't need robbery to get essential functions, and B, that taxation is in fact robbery? And because I don't think he's going to see that.
Yeah, and it's a great example to use to show the contradiction and hypocrisy that every statist does, and that I did for years and years and years when I was a statist. If someone came up to Martin Minarchist and said, I think it's really important that kids get a good education, and I'm not really sure that people would do that voluntarily, give me your money, I'm going to make sure they do it voluntarily. And even if they did it nicely and said, first I'll send you a letter asking you politely, and then I'll do a few other things, and then eventually men will come to your house with guns and kick you out of your house, and I'm going to take your house, because that's what happens if you don't pay property taxes. The sheriff will show up and steal your house. They'll show up with guns. Minarchists wouldn't do that and would recognize that as wrong, which means their moral code is perfectly fine. Their moral code is not quite knowing how something will work is not a good enough excuse to commit armed robbery.
Right.
But they've been taught to believe if you do it by way of elections, then it's okay, because that's somehow different. Well, the Constitution says Congress can tax. So, they're allowed to because some piece of parchment said they can for some reason. And so that doesn't count. And it's really just a matter of getting them to recognize that they've been tricked by mythology into betraying their own values.
Right.
Like Martin Minarchist, who wouldn't rob you by himself but will vote for somebody else to do it, and won't even see it as robbery. Like you said, he won't recognize it as theft because it's covered in all this mythology and these rituals, and we have these elections and appointments and this legislation and all these things to make it, and all the terminology. We don't call it robbery, we call it taxation and law and yada yada yada, to hide what it really is. And if you take away the euphemisms and the garbage that train people to not see reality, it's kind of hard to miss the glaring contradiction between being a decent person and believing in government, because they just don't match. And when people have to choose between them, most people will choose, I would rather not have innocent people be robbed. And the moment you would rather not have innocent people be robbed, you're an anarchist.
Well,
go ahead.
I would say that Stacy the statist would argue that you...
I was going to say Molly the minarchist, but, go ahead. Stacy the statist.
I had to come up with a different word there.
Stacy the statist.
So she might argue that, of course, it's wrong to be robbed, but if you're not robbed by the government to pay for education and police and necessary functions, you will then, therefore, instead be robbed by your average Joe mafia man to pay for whatever it is that he wants. Because without government and police, there would be utter chaos. Of course.
Yeah, and again, these are excuses that come up. They're basically excuses that people fabricate to try to justify the contradictions in their own head. Because Stacy Statist would not use that argument in any context other than politics. She wouldn't go up to somebody and say, I'm sorry to have to rob you, But if I don't steal your money in order to hire this guy to protect you, somebody might rob you. Nobody is insane enough to think that in any context other than politics and government. So all of that kind of argument, and I've heard tons of statists say exactly that and use that as their argument, but it doesn't, because they never use it in any other context, it shows that they're fishing for an attempted rationalization of a belief system that doesn't make any sense and actually contradicts their, if somebody actually said, yeah, I'd rob you at gunpoint to pay for something, they would at least be consistent when they vote for government to do it. But the reason there's hope is because it's inconsistent, because Stacey Statist and Martin Minarchist wouldn't do it on their own because they'd recognize that as wrong. It's only when they're tricked into thinking it's okay, when you do it by these magic rituals, that's what pits us against each other. It makes, perpetual war among us, because then everybody's running to see who can be first to get the government to do what they want. Like, they're not running around saying, behave the way I want and give me your money, but they are running to government and saying, make her behave the way I want and give me her money.
It is kind of ironic that people say, I need to rob you so that other people don't rob you.
Yeah.
Like, I need to do bad things because other people might do bad things. It doesn't make any real sense.
I think Stacey the Statist would agree to that point, but she might also ask, are you saying that people are just good and will never try to rob you, and so we can just have no police and everybody would just be living in peace?
And if I'm feeling nasty, I'd say, you, Stacey Statist, I believe you are good if you will give up government and stop robbing me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are other people out there who would actually rob me on their own, but they're a small minority. The number of people who will rob me by way of government is almost 100%. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like you were saying, the weirdest thing is to say you need to be robbed in order to be protected from robbers. It's the most obvious contradiction there is. It's also the most common attempted justification for government, is because there are bad people out there. And it's not because I think everybody's trustworthy. It's not because I don't think nasty people are out there. But it's funny because when statists say that, they are acknowledging that theft is bad. We need to be protected from the people who would steal our money. And to start your solution with, so let's start by robbing people. No one would ever come up with that idea on their own. Nobody would start with that solution unless they weren't trained to imagine that a certain kind of that is okay.
Well, if Stacey believes that she's going to be robbed either way, in whichever world that we live in, government or no government, she might think it's a more peaceful robbery with the government and a more violent robbery with just the thieves on the streets. So is there anything you can say to Stacey the Statist to convince her that despite there being some bad people that want to rob her without the government, that she will still be protected in other ways?
A couple things. First, I'd ask Stacey to please not rob me if she's concerned about people being robbed. Or please not advocate that somebody else robs me. The other one is when people talk about, I mostly want freedom, but there's a few things government just has to do. You want somebody to protect you. You want some organization, you want some, tough guys with guns to make sure you're not robbed. Which do you think will give you a better service? A, you go to them and they say, here's what we do, here's the price, whether it's you or your town or however many people who want to hire us to do this service, and you can decide if you want to purchase this service, and you can decide if you like it. You can quit and go ask somebody else. That's option one. Option two is, we're going to decide what to do for you. If anything, we decide the price. You don't have a choice. The latter being government. Now, why on earth would Stacey think that having no choice who to spend her money on to protect herself will work out better for her than protection in an anarchist society where she's allowed to hire people, you're allowed to cooperate, you're allowed to organize, you don't become government, you don't acquire a right to rob your neighbor. But the idea that government will ever serve the people better than freedom is saying, you being able to spend your own money, that's going to work out really badly for you. But me stealing your money and deciding how to spend it on your behalf, that'll be great. And that's the excuse for government. And if you just, that's not exactly advanced economics to know you'll get a better product if you get to decide whether to buy it and who to buy it from. But people are sort of taught that no, you can't be allowed. We have to have one big giant thing that we don't have a choice about. One big giant good guy to save the day.
Are there any final thoughts you have to Martin Minarchist or Stacey Statist that will show them that deep down that they are just like us and there's really not much separating us? In terms of our private daily lives, I think we all agree that we are the same as Martin Minarchus for sure. I mean, he's not, as far as I know, he's not going into a supermarket with a gun demanding tomatoes. So, final thoughts on everyone is an anarchist, they just don't know it yet.
I was a minarchist for many years, so I was what lots of people still are. And it wasn't because I was evil, and it wasn't because I wanted people robbed. And it was just because, and now I can look back and say it was because I was tricked into betraying my own values and my own moral code. And I would say to Martin Minarchist and Stacey Statist and anybody else who advocates government of any kind, of any flavor, of any size, get consistent inside your own head and you will end up an anarchist. And I got there by accident, by removing the inconsistencies and noticing, whoops, I turned into an anarchist. And it doesn't mean I throw bombs at people and break windows. It means I don't advocate violence against my fellow man. I only advocate force and self-defense. When you get to that point, you suddenly realize government can't be legitimate. And so I went through that process. I know a whole lot of other people who went through that process. And it wasn't because we turned evil and hated society. It's because we figured out peaceful coexistence is better than violent domination. How tough is it to figure that out? When you figure that out, you're a voluntarist.
Any final thoughts, Stacey?
No. Just that I'm not Stacey, because I would never say those things.
I'm never.
I think I want to wrap it up by saying that I see the only difference between us and your Martin Minarchist is that Martin Minarchist believes that the market works 95% of the time, whereas we here at this table believe that the market works 100% of the time. And so by market, we just mean voluntary interactions between peaceful human beings. And so markets produce bread, and they produce televisions, and they produce lots of wonderful things that we count on, iPhones and all that. And so if you think that it works 95% of the time, ask yourself why it all of a sudden fails miserably that last 5%. And I think you'll realize that you're a lot like we are at this table, and you'll become Larkin the anarchist and not Martin the Minarchist. So.
I did this post, and it was just basically the anarchist symbol, and it was a statement about what anarchy is. And I said something to the effect, if you think the assholes dressed in black burning shit down on TV are anarchists, you don't know anything at all about anarchy, something to that effect. And ended up with like 75,000 views and hundreds of comments and a bunch of triggered individuals, man. I mean, they were triggered by this because you're an idiot if you think anarchy can work. Well, as you saw if you looked at the title of this video, is you're probably an anarchist whether you know it or not. At least most of you are. At least in my audience. And even many people that consider themselves right-wing, small government, blah, 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 blah. If I ask you this simple question, there's two questions you can look at that will show that you're 1 degree or another of an anarchist. And one is, do you believe that taxation is theft? And that's an absolute. If you believe that, period, like there is no place for one person taking property from another person against their will through the use of force, then you are an anarchist. You just haven't figured out how it works yet. If you believe it's okay, I could debate that with you, but then maybe you're not an anarchist, right? I mean, that's pretty simple. And I would just say if you think it's okay, then I want to know this. How can a person, without a right, confer a right they do not have to another person? Because that's what voting is. If I don't have a right to come to your house and demand 15% of your shit, then I can't elect somebody to take 15% of your shit. Does that make sense? And all this social contract crap, I'm sorry, I wasn't there to agree to it. But let's take something a little bit easier to swallow for most people. If you believe in the basic principles of agorism, you're an anarchist. And that basic principle that I'm talking about today is, do you believe that two people have a right to trade with each other independent of any third party, if they want to? In other words, to make that really simple, do you think, let's say that you make really good cider and your neighbor grows a bunch of apples and your neighbor gives you apples and you give them cider, do you think that's okay? Or do you think that you should report that transaction to the Internal Revenue Service and pay taxes on it? Do you think that the Internal Revenue Service needs to know about that? Do you think the government needs to know about that transaction between you and your neighbor? No? Guess what? That's anarchism. And that's kind of my point today. I'm not an anarchist because I want to change the world to an anarchist, non-state. I'm not an anarchist because I want to impose my will of what I consider anarchy on you. I am an anarchist not because of how I think, but because of how I act, which is driven by how I think. And what I mean by that is plenty of things that I do, and probably things that you do every day, you could call very anarchist. When you're driving down the road and the speed limit says 55 and you're like, no, fuck that, there's no reason to do 55 here, and I don't think I'm going to get caught by a cop, and you drive 65, you're being an anarchist. You're choosing to not obey the rules set above you because you're not recognizing the authority of the ruler to impose that rule on you. Okay? And you might slow down if you think you're going to get caught, but that's no different than you might be a little bit guarded if you have to walk through a dark alley thinking somebody might rob you. You see how that works? Every time you do anything that the government says you're supposed to do a certain way and you choose not to, you're being an anarchist. And I am an anarchist in as many ways as I can, not just through disobedience, but through lifestyle choices. Here's some examples. Number one, most people, the food you buy is almost 100% of it is subsidized by tax dollars. I've made a lifestyle choice. I don't consume grains. I only consume locally produced, grass-fed, etc. And therefore, the majority of the food I consume is not subsidized with tax dollars. That's an anarchist, conscious objection decision. Additionally, a huge portion of the meat that I acquire for my home, I barter for. I barter for it. I don't buy it. I barter for it. That's an act of anarchy because the system doesn't want that. I certainly don't tell the government, hey, I bartered for a steak today. That's anarchy. When I moved here, I sought a place to be as least dependent on the system as I possibly could. While I get electricity, and there is some subsidy in that, it comes from a private company, and I chose a competitive carrier, not the one the government said I had to. That's edgy, but it's, you could call it at least a little bit there. But I also chose a place where I have my own well, and I have my own septic system. I do not rely on the government for my waste or for my water. That's a decision. That's a conscious decision to do without government and to impose a private solution in my life. That's a choice. That's anarchy. Where I live, I also chose a place where, guess what? We have no government-provided garbage removal. How would you ever get rid of garbage? It turns out there's people who will voluntarily come get your garbage and take it away for you if you pay them money voluntarily. You don't actually need a third-party intermediary like the government. I'm an anarchist by using cryptocurrency, specifically privacy coins like Monero and R. If I have to explain to you how that works, you don't really know what cryptocurrencies are or Monero and R are, and that's not what today's subject is about. But by doing business in a completely private way, where transacting business is only between two people with no third-party intermediary and no reporting to the government, that's as anarchist and as agorist as fuck. See, so now I know what some of you are going to say, but you use the roads. You use the roads. Okay. You want to do a purity test? How about this? Do you ever cheat on your taxes? Okay, you don't pass the purity test. Do you ever speed when you're in your car? Okay, you don't pass the purity test. Do you ever conduct barter without reporting it to the government? Okay, you don't. See how that works? See, we got to stop thinking in this binary, ones and zeros world that we live in today. On, off, 1, 0, on, off, 1, 0. No. It's like a dimmer switch. How much of this can you incorporate into your life? I live as anarchist as I can in the world that I live in with an expectation that there are certain things I need to do to protect myself. And again, if I'm walking down the road and somebody robs me, and instead of being able for me to draw down on them, they have, there's a guy there, a guy there, a guy behind me, and a guy over there, and all of them have a gun pointed at me at the same time, and they say, give me your wallet, and I know if drawing my weapon, I'm going to die. I got no choice. I'm going to give them my wallet. That does not mean that I see them as legitimate authorities in my life. And that's the big one. I deny the legitimacy of the state. That's what makes me an anarchist. Not because, I want to, you know what? If you want to live with Nancy Pelosi as your Speaker of the House, you get to do that. I'm an anarchist. I don't have the right to take that away from you. Do you see how that works? If you want to live with a boot on your throat, you have every right to live with a boot on your throat. I have every right to resist it. That's what anarchism is. It's not these jackasses on TV throwing shit through windows and people say, well, what would you do about that in anarchy? If it was an anarcho-society, those people would have got shot in the face the day that shit started and those cities would not have burned. That's what would have happened. Because the right to your property is seen as valid. The peaceful, rightful property holdings that you have to be respected. And people that don't respect that, they say, well, they're leftist anarchists, they're anarcho-communists. Sorry guys, that's not a thing. That's not a thing, because you can't impose your will on others through force and be an anarchist because you're violating what's known as the non-aggression principle. And how are you going to impose your will on others to create a communist society without a state? You can't do it. You need a state to do that. If you have a state, you're not an anarchist. See how that works? I know they call themselves anarchists. I know it's generally recognized in the intellectual school of thought that there are, communist anarchists. And I'll tell you how communism anarchism works. I just haven't ever met a communist anarchist that's okay with this. Maybe a few of them are out there somewhere, I don't know. You do you, and I'll do me. If socialism is an adjective rather than a system imposed from a hierarchy, I have no problem with it. If you and all your buddies want to form a commune, if you want to form a collective that is beyond borders, with economic agreements between yourselves, and as long as you voluntarily engage in that, go ahead. Now, I'll tell you why they don't ever want to do it. They don't ever want to make the agreement back, so then I can go out and do all my anarcho-capitalist stuff if you feel the need to put a label on it, because they know it won't work for them. And they know it will work for me, because here's the final thing on how I know most people are anarchists at heart, and it is agorism that tells us this. Everything that we look at politically in general, it requires the imposition of a system by some form of authority to make it run. So taxation requires imposition. All right? Here we go. Agorism requires nothing but human beings left to themselves. You cannot show me a group of people anywhere in any condition at all ever that didn't engage in trade and commerce. Little kids set up lemonade stands. You put people in prison, they still engage in commerce when they're not supposed to. Even when the system imposes a barrier to commerce, we as humans conduct commerce. Unlike most principles that we have in the world today that we see as, well, it came from God or it was ordained with this. We created all these systems. We made all these systems. We invented all these systems. Agorism was not invented by humans. It is what humans do. Put two kids together in a room, give them a stack of baseball cards, and see how long it takes before they start trading. And they don't need a third party. If you don't think you need a third party to conduct commerce, you're an agorist, and if you're an agorist, you're an anarchist. I know that may be hard to believe, but just because you don't know how to make it work yet doesn't mean it isn't what you really believe at your core. Do you believe that you can convey a right you do not have? If you say no, you cannot convey a right you don't have, you can't defend voting and you can't defend the state. You're in conflict with yourself.
All right, so that's it. I mean, there's 3 minutes left, but the rest of the video is just images and articles and showing more reasons as to why the everyday person who just trades with one another and doesn't want violence is an abolitionist, an anarchist, a voluntarist, an agorist, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing at the end of the day. Right, but definitely recommend checking out. This is a little video compilation I made. The last speaker there, his name was Jack Spirko. You might know who he is, maybe not. And the speaker before that, of course, was Larkin Rose. Great people. From what I hear, I haven't got to meet Jack Spirko, but he definitely talks about a lot of these ideas. Definitely great to see you guys, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. I know it's a little bit earlier for a live stream, Usually I go a little bit longer, promote a little bit more, but it's a little late and I'm a little exhausted from just doing stuff, to be honest. But speaking of honesty, I released my short little book on honesty called Nature's Radical Honesty. Feel free to check it out. I have Kindle and paperback edition on Amazon. I'll release a little trailer thingy as well. But it's nothing crazy. It's not more than 50 pages. And it's also very, very tiny. It's not like a normal size book. It's meant to be very simple to be read. That's the goal. Right? I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a world of people who aren't going to read anyways for the most part. So it's about just bringing things down the principle as simple as possible and then working with it and acting upon it. So this is basically going over everything that has to do with the simplest of the simple. And so if you're curious about it, Awaken Your Minds in the chat, I did an interview with him a little bit, going over all sorts of concepts like that. But anyways, we'll keep in touch, guys. I'll definitely live stream more in the future, as I always say, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. It's the 10th. You can check your email. I sent out day 10 already, so you should have it. And if you have any problems, of course, you let me know. The roundtable with many of the speakers will be on around the 16th. Well, on the 16th. And it'll be around 8 p.m. EST. Figured I'd give you guys a little bit of a hint since you guys are the ones who watch the live streams. You're dedicated. So, thank you. Keep sharing the word about the summit. I'd appreciate it. If you can get it out there more and more to more people, it's what we got to do. Just keep sharing. For now, that's pretty much the top priority. Anyways, thank you guys. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to be heading out. So, you guys take it easy out there. Keep it cool. Be sure to update me next time you come in the chat, you know. Let me know what's going on, what plans you're making. And maybe I can assist you. You never know. But regardless, I'm always here for you. Keep in touch. Take care, guys.